Chapter 3556. If Jiku were Yuan-ji, she would naturally thank the black-armored elder. After all, he was telling the truth, and it was the best way to lessen her punishment. However, Jiku was not Yuan-ji. Therefore, she chose to fight back. Only by doing so could she have a chance to escape. "Thank you for your kindness, but I will never surrender," Jiku shouted coldly. She waved the heavenly phoenix divine spear and charged toward the southwest. There were only 2 mid-level godly kings guarding that direction. It was a breach in the encirclement. Phoenix dances in the 9 heavens. Boundless sea of fire. Jiku waved her divine spear and shot out hundreds of flaming spear shadows toward the 2 godly kings. At the same time, she released a vast amount of 5-colored divine fire, which swept toward them like a flood. The 2 god kings immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. They hurriedly took out their divine weapons and resisted with all their might. However, the black-armored elder and the other godly kings did not take her attack seriously. They all sneered contemptuously. "You're throwing an egg at a rock. Yuan-ji, you have a way out. Why are you digging your own grave? Idiot! Are you tired of living? Since you don't want to surrender, we can only take you back. Yuan-ji, we have to thank you. If you don't fight back, how can we do anything?" As the godly kings spoke, they waved their divine weapons and used all kinds of divine skills to attack Jiku. The black-armored elder was too proud to attack. After all, the other 7 godly kings were enough to capture or even kill Yuan-ji. Boom! 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 In the next moment, the divine skills collided with each other, creating an earth-shattering sound that spread for tens of thousands of miles. Jiku's spear shadows and divine fire were not only blocked by the godly kings, but they also dissipated. Without waiting for her to cast another spell, the divine kings used their divine abilities and ultimate skills to launch a counterattack. Swoosh! 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 5-colored divine light, ice and fire poured down like a flood, drowning Jiku. Without a doubt, the combined attack of 7 god kings could immediately kill her. At this critical moment, she put away the heavenly phoenix divine spear without hesitation and gave up on Yuan-ji's divine body. With a thought, the godhead and the heavenly phoenix divine spear shuttled through space, returning to the 9 heavens 10 absolutes tower several 100,000 li away. Yuan-ji's divine body was shattered by the divine light and splashed in all directions. What was even more terrifying was that the pieces of the corpses were also burned to ashes and turned into fine powder. After a long time, the divine light that filled the sky gradually disappeared, and the loud sound that reverberated between heaven and earth also gradually stopped. The 8 god kings stared at the empty night sky with complicated expressions. Why did you kill him? So dead that not even a speck of his remains remains? This brat is so arrogant, but in the end his strength is still so weak. He can't even withstand a single blow. I didn't expect that he couldn't even withstand a single attack from us. With such little strength, how could he destroy the altar and steal the divine beads? Forget it. He's already turned into ashes. What's the point of thinking about that? At first we just wanted to teach him a lesson and seriously injure him before taking him back for trial. I didn't expect him to die so cleanly. Yuan-ji was killed by us. What about the fortune divine beads? That's right. Our mission is to capture Yuan-ji and retrieve the fortune divine beads. Everyone, let's look for it. The god kings discussed for a while, then suddenly remembered that the fortune divine beads hadn't appeared yet, and they suddenly panicked. Only the black-armored old man's face was gloomy, and he frowned as if he was thinking about something. A middle-aged god king came over and asked respectfully, "Divine General Chong, what are you thinking about? Do you have any idea?" The black-armored old man glanced at him and said in a low voice, "Yuan-ji could have surrendered and saved his life, but he stubbornly resisted and was killed in one move. Moreover, after he was killed, the fortune divine beads disappeared without a trace." Thinking about it carefully, he seemed to have deliberately sought death in order to hide the whereabouts of the fortune divine beads. The middle-aged god king was stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. After listening to your analysis, it does seem to be the case. Now that Yuan-ji is dead, the clues to the fortune divine beads are gone. Where are we going to find them?" The black-armored old man frowned and looked into the distance with a deep gaze. He said in a low voice, "I have a feeling that this matter isn't that simple. Yuan-ji might just be a chess piece used to send himself to his death and to deceive others. The real culprit might be someone else. Whoever has the fortune divine beads is the mastermind behind all this." The middle-aged god king nodded in agreement again and praised sincerely, "The older the ginger, the spicier it is. As expected, you see things more clearly. Divine General Chong, what should we do next?" The black-armored old man thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "If we continue to investigate, I'm afraid it will implicate important people. Let's just report it to the marshal and ask him and the commander to make a decision." The other god kings wanted to search for the fortune divine beads. After hearing the black-armored old man's analysis, everyone stopped searching and returned to his side. After he made his decision, everyone agreed and followed him back to Yudu. Yudu City, in a courtyard near the North City Gate. Ji Tianqing was in the darkness, silently waiting for news. Suddenly he felt the aura of the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda fluctuate. He immediately realized that Jiku had abandoned Yuan-ji's body and returned to the interior of the pagoda. As expected, Jika's godhead returned to the 9th level of the pagoda and burrowed into her main body that had been sleeping in the sea of fire. The 9th level was filled with nirvana flames and was a boundless sea of fire. Only Jiku could enter and exit at will. After her godhead returned to its original position, everything returned to normal. When Ji Tianqing saw this scene with his divine sense, he hurriedly contacted her through voice transmission. After 2 breaths, Jiku responded, "Brother Tianqing, I was surrounded by 8 god kings and escaped in the chaos. Yuan-ji's body should have been destroyed by them and turned into ashes. After all, those 8 guys were middle and high-level god kings." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing frowned and asked doubtfully, 8 god kings? Is it not Blood Prison Marshal? He didn't show up? Jiku sat cross-legged in the sea of fire and adjusted her breathing. She replied, "Blood Prison Marshal received Qian Yuan's message and knew what happened. However, he didn't show up and only sent Divine General Reincarnation and 7 god kings. It's just capturing Yuan-ji. Those 8 god kings are more than enough." Ji Tianqing said with some regret, "In that case, we still can't confirm the location and traces of Blood Prison Marshal?" Jiku was silent for a moment before saying bitterly, "But one thing is certain, Blood Prison Marshal isn't cultivating in seclusion. He can receive messages at any time. Once something more important happens, it is possible that he will appear." Ji Tianqing weighed the pros and cons for a moment before making up his mind. "No matter what, tonight is the best chance for me to take action. I can't wait any longer." Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 3557. Ji Tianqing's analysis was right. For the past few days, the strong practitioners of Yudu City had been attracted by the theft of the divine bead, and their attention was on this matter. They naturally didn't pay much attention to the abyss of reincarnation and the passage of 2 worlds. However, Yuan-ji had just been killed, and this matter would soon pass, and everyone's attention would be diverted. Once this matter passed, it would be more difficult for him to sneak into the passage of 2 worlds again. Furthermore, Commander Mingyi would return to Yudu in another 2 days. No matter how he looked at it, tonight was the best time to head to the abyss of reincarnation. Ji Tianqing made up his mind and walked out of the darkness. He left the house and walked towards the North City Gate. At this time it was already the 5th day of the night and dawn was about to arrive. The North City Gate was open, and there were close to 100 city guards guarding it. There was also a Divine King Realm commander overseeing it. There weren't many people entering and exiting the city gate. Occasionally there would be 2 or 3 people walking in groups. Ji Tianqing walked to the city gate at a moderate pace. He took out his identity token and accepted the interrogation of the city guards. Then he was allowed to enter. From the beginning to the end, no one took a second look at him, and no one doubted him. After all, he was now Long Tian, an ordinary youth of the dragon race. This was his name in the dragon realm in his previous life. The old dragon gave him this name. After exiting the North City Gate, Ji Tianqing flew into the night sky and headed north at lightning speed. The abyss of reincarnation, to be precise, was in the northwest of Yudu City. It was hundreds of thousands of miles away. Ji Tianqing quickly crossed mountains, forests, and plains. After 15 minutes, he arrived near the abyss of reincarnation. This abyss was in the depths of the mountains, in a huge canyon surrounded by clouds and mist. It was surrounded by majestic mountains that were thousands of feet tall. The canyon was covered by gray clouds all year round. At first glance, the gray fog did indeed look like the aura of death. Near the abyss of reincarnation, Ji Tianqing became much more cautious. Seeing that there was no one around, he used his invisibility divine art and quietly passed through the gray fog, entering the canyon. In the middle of the canyon was an abyss with a radius of hundreds of miles. It was like a bottomless pit. On the ground around the abyss, 9 sacrificial altars were built. There were hundreds of guards guarding each one. The 9 sacrificial altars were operating, releasing countless strands of 5-colored divine light that extended to the sky above the abyss. Billions of 5-colored divine light rays condensed into a defensive light barrier that was hundreds of miles in radius, like a huge bowl that was upside down. Obviously, the entrance to the abyss of reincarnation was sealed. If he wanted to enter the abyss, he had to either break the sealing divine formation or get the token from Commander Styx and the Blood Hell Marshal. Of course, the latter was out of the question. Ji Tianqing only had one choice, and that was to break the divine array. Reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation. Reincarnation of reincarnation, reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation. However, there were 900 guards around the abyss. Reincarnation, reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation. Ji Tianqing hid in the clouds and carefully observed the situation around the abyss, thinking of a countermeasure. His first thought was to create chaos and divert the guards' attention. He would then take the opportunity to break the formation. For example, he could use the Armillary Heaven secret technique to merge with heaven and earth and create a super earthquake. However, after careful consideration, he gave up on this idea. After all, a super earthquake could only scare ordinary people. It definitely would not scare the guards. The 900 guards were all carefully selected experts. They were basically all reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation. There were also a few reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation under each sacrificial altar. They should be captains. Soon Ji Tianqing thought of using his poison divine art to silently poison all the guards. However, this was not safe. Unless he could poison everyone instantly. Otherwise, someone would be poisoned first and someone would be poisoned later. There would always be someone who could send out a signal for help. He gave up on this idea. In 15 minutes, he thought of 6 or 7 ideas. However, none of them worked or were too risky. Helpless, he could only look through his spatial ring, hoping to find a better idea. In the past few years, he had killed many Divine King powerhouses and obtained countless spoils of war. Items below Divine King level were basically all swallowed by him with the Heaven-Mending Pearl. The medicinal pills, cultivation methods, and divine artifacts that could still be stored in the Divine Ring were basically all Divine King level. His divine sense searched through the treasures piled up like a mountain. He constantly swept past those divine pills, divine artifacts, jade slips, and rare treasures. After about 100 breaths, his divine sense suddenly fixed on an ancient bronze box. He still remembered that he had obtained it from a certain region lord's spatial ring after killing him. Back then, when he was counting his spoils of war, he had opened the ancient bronze box to take a look. Inside was a simple and ancient bronze bell. From the mottled marks on the bell, it should be an ancient item. At that time, he took the bronze bell and studied it. He discovered that this item could release the soul-suppressing divine sound. It was a very obscure king-level divine artifact. Although the bronze bell was a king-level middle-grade divine artifact, its effect did not have any killing power. It was very difficult to use it. But now it finally had a chance to use it. Ji Tianqing took out the ancient bronze box from the divine ring, and took out the bronze bell mottled with copper rust. I'll call you the soul-suppressing bell for now. I hope you don't disappoint me. He held the soul-suppressing bell with both hands and muttered to himself. His eyes were filled with anticipation. Then he formed a divine seal with his left hand, and held the soul-suppressing bell with his right hand. He poured in boundless divine power and began to shake it rhythmically. The dim soul-suppressing bell immediately became lustrous with green light as if it had come alive. Ding, ding, ding. Clear and melodious, distant and ethereal sounds came from the soul-suppressing bell one after another. The strange thing was that the sound of the bell was very soft. Only within a 10-step radius could one hear it with their ears. But Ji Tianqing sensed that the soul-suppressing bell was emitting rings of formless ripples that spread in all directions and enveloped the entire canyon. Those formless ripples had a mysterious and powerful soul-suppressing power. Even he, a middle divine king, was slightly careless and his divine soul was suppressed, his consciousness becoming somewhat muddled. But he immediately realized that something was wrong and aimed the soul-suppressing bell at the abyss below. Ding ding, ding ding ding. The soft bell sounds continued to sound out. The formless soul-suppressing ripples also spread out very rhythmically. Very soon Ji Tianqing saw the effect. Under the sacrificial altars around the abyss, those 900 divine Lord Realm guards were still standing like statues before, appearing to be in high spirits, mighty and dignified. After being enveloped by the formless soul-suppressing ripples, those guards all staggered left and right, squatting on the ground in a daze. Many guards with weak divine souls directly collapsed on the ground, falling into a deep sleep. In a short few breaths, the 900 guards virtually all collapsed. Only a dozen or so high divine Lord Realm captains were still barely holding on. Of course, their footsteps were also staggering and drowsy, unable to muster up any divine power at all. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 3558. What's going on? What happened? Why did everyone fall asleep? This wouldn't happen for no reason. There must be a problem. The guards around the abyss had all fallen into a deep sleep and were unconscious. A few of the guard captains could still stay awake. They were barely hanging on as they discussed in a panic. However, they didn't know what had happened, nor did they know how to solve the problem. Someone wanted to send a message for help, but he didn't have time to take out his communication jade slip before he fainted. Of course, even if they took out their communication jade slip, they didn't know how to report it. Should they report to their superiors that they had been attacked? They didn't even see the enemy's shadow. Moreover, the attack had happened without warning. Just like that, a few of the guard captains held on for a while before they closed their eyes and fell to the ground. In an instant, the abyss became silent. All the guards had fallen into a deep sleep and were lying on the ground. It was a strange scene. Ji Tianqing didn't dare to waste any time. He quickly put away the requiem bell and flew near the ceiling array. He began to observe the array and find a way to break it. This was the first time he had used the requiem bell. He couldn't estimate its effects and duration. The 900 guards might be asleep for a day or two. In short, they wouldn't be asleep for too long. If it was more than a day and a night, the divine kings guarding the passage between the two worlds at the bottom of the abyss would also notice the abnormality. Ji Tianqing had to break the ceiling array in front of him within a limited time. Damn it, another supreme grade king array. After seeing the structure and veins of the array, Ji Tianqing frowned. A sinister look flashed across his eyes. Originally, a supreme grade king array was nothing. However, the ceiling array in front of him was formed by the divine power of the 9 altars. It was one of the most complicated arrays. Even a top array expert like Ji Tianqing would find it difficult to break it in a day. However, there was no turning back. Since he had already taken down 900 guards, he could only try his best to break the array. Time passed silently. Ji Tianqing stared at the ceiling array with all his attention. His eyes shone with a golden light. He could see the hundreds of millions of veins of the array clearly. His mind was also working at a terrifying speed. He tried his best to analyze the array's veins and deduce a way to break it. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. Before he knew it, 12 hours had passed. It was already dusk. The sun was on its way. Night was on its way. It was very dark in the canyon. The 900 guards were still lying under the altar, still in a comatose state. However, Ji Tianqing think the requiem bell's effect. Around midnight, the guards would gradually wake up. Fortunately, no one entered the canyon during the day. Just based on this point alone, the heavens were already looking out for him. Otherwise, if any random passerby saw that all of the guards had fainted, they would surely spread the news. Why is it so complicated? The structure of this divine array is perfect. I can't find a way to break it. This is definitely not the work of the Blood Hell Marshal or Commander Styx. It must be the work of the god of the underworld. Ji Tianqing's heart was filled with anxiety as he muttered to himself. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He had never seen the god of the underworld since his rebirth, but he had already fought with the god of the underworld once and won. He had successfully stolen the creation divine pearl. This was the second time. He wasn't confident yet. Very quickly another 4 hours passed. It was late at night. Deep into the night thick gray clouds shrouded the Grand Canyon. The canyon was as dark as ink. Only the 9 altars flickered with a faint 5-colored divine light. Ji Tianqing was still focused on observing the ceiling array. He kept changing his position to find a way to break the array. Unfortunately, he still couldn't find a way to break it. He had failed several times. The only thing that comforted him was that he finally found a weak point in the divine array. It was at the northwest edge of the abyss. He relaxed a little. He raised his sleeve to wipe the sweat on his pale cheeks. He turned his head to look at the situation around the abyss. He saw that the guards under the 9 altars were showing signs of waking up. More than a dozen guard captains were unconsciously twisting and stretching their bodies. Some of them were even groaning in pain. Based on this situation, they would wake up in at most an hour. Ji Tianqing became even more anxious. No, there's not enough time. Not to mention that he hadn't perfected the method to break the array. Even if it would be too late to use it. He would need at least 6 to 8 hours to break the array. By then the guards would have woken up. Before he could break the divine array, the 900 guards would attack him and tear him to pieces. There was less than an hour left. What should he do? Was he going to waste all his efforts? Ji Tianqing frowned and weighed his options anxiously. At this critical moment he became calmer and more decisive. After a few breaths he made a risky decision. It's too late to break the divine array. In this situation I can only aim at the weak point of the divine array and break it with brute force. With my current strength, if I use all my trump cards and go all out, there might be some hope. This is the only way. After making up his mind, he started to act. Swoosh! He flew across the dark night sky and came to the northwest edge of the abyss. He stared at the weak point of the 5-colored light shield. He took out the burial of heaven and used the celestial dragon tyrant body. Swoosh! As the dazzling golden light flashed, he turned into a giant god in golden armor. His body was covered with dragon scales and there was a dragon horn on his forehead. He looked exactly like a dragon. After the transformation, his combat strength increased by 7 times. His body surged with a violent aura that could destroy the world. He held the burial of heaven with both hands and injected endless divine power into it. He let the burial of heaven cooperate with him to erupt with the fiercest and most violent power. But this was not enough. He borrowed the power of the 5 elements world and used his trump card, the Sword of Annihilation. Open for me. When all the power was accumulated to the peak, Ji Tianqing gritted his teeth and roared. He held the burial of heaven with both hands and stabbed at the ceiling divine array under his feet. Kaboom! The next moment, the dazzling golden sword, which was thousands of feet long, stabbed the 5-colored light shield with an invincible and world-destroying momentum. When the giant sword collided with the light shield, there was a deafening explosion that reverberated in the canyon. In fact, the loud noise was so shocking that it shook the entire canyon. Violent shockwaves of divine power spread out in all directions along with countless fragments of divine light. Instantly, the sleeping guards were also scattered by the shockwaves, and many of them were killed or injured. Chapter 3559. Ji Tianqing had tried his best to reduce the commotion caused by breaking the array forcefully. However, the heaven-shaking, earth-shattering sound and momentum spread out for thousands of miles, and still affected hundreds of guards. Many guards were severely injured by the divine power shockwave while they were unconscious. Their bodies were mottled with blood. Some unlucky fellows were directly killed by the shockwave, their bodies smashed into pieces. With such serious consequences, it was impossible for Ji Tianqing to hide and keep it a secret. He had expected that the divine kings guarding the bottom of the abyss would have sensed something amiss. However, there was nothing he could do about it. He only had two choices. Either all his previous efforts would be wasted, or he would give it his all. Fortunately, he had made the right bet and succeeded. The 1,000-foot-long sword of Armageddon accurately pierced the weak point of the divine array and brutally penetrated it. A huge hole had appeared on the 5-colored light barrier, and 5-colored divine power was constantly leaking out. The entire divine array was impacted. The 9 altars connected to the abyss shook violently. Phew! It's finally broken. President Jition exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, revealing a relieved expression. Looking at the hole in the 5-colored light barrier, he did not have time to be emotional or happy. He quickly returned to his original appearance and entered the abyss of reincarnation through the hole. Swoosh! After entering the abyss, he used his invisibility ability and tried his best to hide his aura as he flew down. As for the unconscious, severely injured, and guards who were gradually waking up, he could no longer care about them. He did not need to repair the hole in the 5-colored light barrier. This was because this supreme-grade divine array had the ability to heal and repair itself. The 100-foot-wide hole was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. After about 30 breaths, the hole was completely healed and restored to its original state. The sealing divine array began to operate again. Everything returned to normal. At this time, the guards around the abyss woke up one after another. The first to wake up were the dozen or so guard captains who were stronger or had secret treasures to protect them. After they woke up, they looked around in confusion and shock. They saw that hundreds of guards were still unconscious and many of them were severely injured. The surrounding mountains were cracked and countless rocks had collapsed. They were confused and puzzled. What happened? What just happened? It seems like there are fewer guards. Why are there bloodstains and corpses on the ground? Could it be that an expert attacked us and killed many guards while we were unconscious? That's not right. We were all in a comatose state and had no power to resist. If someone killed the guards, they would have killed all of us. But from the looks of it, it's clear that a huge battle has taken place here. Even the mountains have collapsed. Who can tell me what's going on? Stop guessing. Quickly send a message to the immortal general. The dozen or so guard captains discussed for a while but did not have any clue. They could only take out their communication jade slips and report the situation to the God King experts at the bottom of the abyss. A full quarter of an hour passed. Ji Tianqing had dived 20,000 miles into the abyss, but he still hadn't reached the bottom. He didn't encounter any obstacles during the 20,000 miles of flight. It was just that the abyss was filled with gray fog, the temperature was bone-chilling, and the surrounding rock walls were covered with icicles. But when he dived down 20,000 miles, he started to encounter obstacles. In the deep abyss with a radius of 100 miles, there were tens of thousands of sabers, spears, swords, and halberds, as well as densely packed netherworld purple fire and balls of soul-devouring blue fire. Those sabers, spears, swords, and halberds were all low-grade king-grade divine artifacts. There were a total of 20,000 of them. Those netherworld purple fire and soul-devouring blue fire were all fist-sized balls. There were as many as 30,000 of them. These two things mixed and intertwined, forming a divine array, like a layer of dangerous barrier. If ordinary divine kings came here, they would definitely be frightened by this lineup. Without the strength of a high-grade god king, they would also be unable to pass through the blockade of sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and divine fires. Once they fell into the array, they would be surrounded and attacked endlessly until they were blasted into pieces. Ji Tianqing stopped in midair and used the God's Eye mystic technique to observe carefully for a moment before continuing to dive. Even though this strange ceiling formation looked extremely sinister and terrifying, it was still extremely terrifying. In reality, its complexity and profoundness were not as profound as the ceiling array at the entrance of the abyss. Ji Tianqing only observed for 15 minutes before he figured out the structure of the divine array and found a way to pass through it. Therefore, he remained invisible and carefully entered the fire array of the Kenshin swords, shuttling through it cleverly. He successfully avoided countless sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and divine fires. He dived for 3,000 miles and didn't encounter any sabers, swords, or divine fires. He didn't trigger any attacks from the divine array. He saw that if he continued to dive for another 2,000 miles, he would be able to pass through the fire array of the Kenshin swords. At this moment, the thing he didn't want to see the most happened. At the bottom of the abyss, there were 5 rays of divine light flying up from below, approaching at an extremely fast speed. Judging from the energy waves of the 5 rays of divine light, they were all God King experts. Obviously, they were the God Kings guarding the passage between the 2 worlds at the bottom of the abyss. They had received the message from the guard captains on the surface and were about to rush to the surface to check the situation. Most importantly, in a few breaths' time they would meet Ji Tianqing. Although Ji Tianqing's concealment divine ability was very brilliant, and his aura was concealed very well, among the 5 rays of divine light speeding over, there were 4 middle-level God Kings and 1 high-level God King. Yet, there was only one correct path to this fire array of the Kenshin swords. If he took a wrong step, he would trigger the divine array and be attacked by sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and divine fires. Those 5 God Kings guarding this place naturally knew the correct path. Therefore, if Ji Tianqing didn't avoid them, he would definitely meet them head-on. Both sides would brush past each other in the space of 2 feet. If those 5 God Kings were a little more cautious and attentive, it was very likely that they would discover him. For a moment, Ji Tianqing's heart was in his mouth again. What to do? How to hide his tracks and not be discovered by those 5 God Kings? Moreover, he had to stay on the correct path and not trigger the fire array of the Kenshin swords. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing was abnormally calm and instantly came up with an idea. Burial of Heaven, it's time to test you. He used divine telekinesis voice transmission to give buried heaven a few instructions. Burial of Heaven immediately understood his intentions. In the next instant, Ji Tianqing took out Burial of Heaven and let it stop in midair. He hid in the world inside the sword and quietly observed the situation outside. At first glance, there was no change in the fire array of the Kenshin swords. Burial of Heaven was mixed in with countless sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and didn't feel out of place and didn't attract any attention. However, there was still a tiny flaw. This space of 2 feet was the correct path to pass through. There were no sabers, swords, or divine fires originally. Now there was an additional pitch-black divine sword. If a God King was attentive enough and understood the fire array of the Kenshin swords well enough, they might discover the abnormality. Chapter 3560. Even though this method had a flaw, the chances of being discovered were not high. Those 5 godly kings anxiously went to the surface to check the situation, looking like they were on fire. They might not notice that a black divine sword appeared in the blade Kenshin fire array. In comparison, Ji Tianqing stayed where he was, brushing past the 5 godly kings. The risk of being exposed was greater. Therefore, Ji Tianqing could only take a gamble. Took a long time to describe, but actually this also happened in the blink of an eye. 2 breaths later, those 5 godly kings entered the blade Kenshin fire array and started traversing the correct path. They seemed to enter and exit frequently and were very familiar with the path. Their speed was very fast. Of course, the 5 godly kings entered in a single file. No one walked side by side. Swoosh, 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 only to see 5 beams of divine light flicker continuously. Those 5 godly kings approached rapidly. In a short 6 breaths, they traversed 2,000 miles and arrived in front of the sword of Burial of Heaven. At this time, Ji Tianqing's heart also leaped to his throat. The critical moment had arrived. Whether or not he could hide from these 5 godly kings, success or failure depended on this one move. Swoosh! The first godly king in the lead arrived in front of the sword of Burial of Heaven. This person was a middle-aged divine race member with grizzled temples. He wore the Star Ink Cloud divine armor. His face was resolute and cold, and his entire body was suffused with cold-killing intent. Furthermore, this person was also the strongest among the 5 godly kings, reaching the 8th level godly king realm. His expression was dark, and his eyes revealed a look of anxiety and anger. He was currently thinking about something in his mind. Towards the sword of Burial of Heaven beside him, he did not even have the interest to take a second look. He brushed past the sword of Burial of Heaven. Immediately after, the second godly king also arrived in front of the sword of Burial of Heaven. This was a guy whose looks and strength were more average. He only had 5th level godly king realm strength. He followed the leader expressionlessly, looking like he was not worried about anything and was only loyal to orders. Without a doubt, he also did not notice the sword of burial of heaven and brushed past it. Next, the third and fourth godly kings also passed through in succession. They were also ordinary mid-level divine kings. They were only in a hurry to rush to the surface through the Blade Kenshin fire formation to check out the situation. As for the sword of burial of heaven, they ignored it just like the other two. At this time Ji Tianqing's hanging heart had already settled back into his stomach. However, he did not expect that the fifth divine king would stop when he passed by the sword of the burial of heaven. This was a god king with a thin figure, and even a bit of a protruding mouth and monkey-like cheeks. His eyes were bright as he looked around. There was a strong sense of craftiness in his eyes. After stopping, he turned his head to look at the sword of burial of heaven that was close at hand and frowned in confusion. He vaguely felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what was wrong, so he frowned and pondered. The four god kings in front had already flown 100 kilometers upwards. Noticing that the fifth god king didn't follow, one of them hurriedly shouted, "Skinny monkey, what are you standing there for? Why aren't you following?" The god king nicknamed Skinny Monkey pointed at the sword of burial of heaven and said to that person, "I seem to remember that this position is empty. It hasn't changed for several decades. Why is there a black sword suddenly?" That god king sneered disapprovingly and said, "Shut up. Isn't it just a sudden incident at the entrance that disturbed your cultivation? No matter how unwilling you are, you still have to follow orders. Don't find excuses. Hurry up and carry out the mission. Can't you see that Divine General Tianzhan is in a bad mood?" After saying that, that god king even pointed at the leading god king. Very clearly, that god king wearing the Star Ink Cloud divine armor was Divine General Tianzhan. Skinny Monkey pursed his lips and said in annoyance, "I have always been obedient and follow orders. How can I not carry out the mission? I'm serious. Don't you remember the situation on this path?" That god king rolled his eyes and said helplessly, "You can't even handle the matters of cultivation. Why are you still remembering these useless things? Anyway, this divine array was set up by the Grand Marshal. Who knows, he might have taken the time to perfect it or change the position of the sword. Alright, I won't wait for you. Take your time to study it. When Lord Divine General is angry and wants to punish you, you can go cry." After saying that, that god king hurriedly followed the team and ignored Skinny Monkey. Skinny Monkey looked at the sword of burial of heaven, and couldn't help but scratch his head. He muttered softly, "Am I being paranoid?" After saying that, he hurriedly followed the others and left quickly. After the five god kings left the sword of Kenshin's fire array and flew tens of thousands of miles upwards, Ji Tianqing finally heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, when Skinny Monkey stared at the sword of burial of heaven and asked his companions, Ji Tianqing was rather nervous and worried. Fortunately, Skinny Monkey wasn't too sure. The other god kings also didn't pay attention to such trivial matters. This allowed Ji Tianqing to muddle through and successfully avoid a calamity. Swoosh! He left the sword world, put away the sword of burial of heaven, and continued to fly in stealth. With the experience just now, he became even more cautious. Moreover, his speed of shuttling through the sword of Kenshin's fire array was relatively slow. As he moved forward, he had to calculate the correct path and consider the next step. Now there was no need for that. The five god kings had already demonstrated the correct path. He just had to follow it. After a few short breaths, he walked out of the sword of Kenshin's fire array. He continued to descend. There was no obstruction for a full 10,000 miles. Finally, Ji Tianqing reached the bottom of the abyss when he dived to a depth of 30,000 miles. In front of him was a boundless sea of magma. All he could see was slow-moving magma. In the endless crimson magma, he could occasionally see a few black spots. Those were reef islands. These reef islands were often made of special materials that could withstand the terrifying heat and magma corrosion. Ji Tianqing stood on a small reef hill and looked at the sea of magma in front of him. He muttered in his heart, 1,000 years have passed, but this place hasn't changed at all. Of course, he remembered that this sea of magma was hundreds of thousands of miles wide and contained countless metals and mineral resources. In the middle of the sea of magma, there was a reef island with a radius of 10,000 miles. The entrance of the passage between the two worlds was on that reef island. There was no need to guess. There must be a large number of troops stationed on that reef island. There were also top powerhouses guarding it. Just now, the 5 God Kings went to the surface to investigate the situation. Now there should be much fewer guards on that island. I have to hurry and enter the passage between the two worlds before they rush back. With that in mind, Ji Tianqing maintained his stealth state and silently flew into the sky, heading straight ahead. Originally, there were a small number of powerful divine beasts and a large number of fire spirits in the Sea of Magma. Back then, when Ji Tianqing came here, he killed 2 divine beasts and refined hundreds of fire spirits. But now the Sea of Magma was very calm. There were no signs of divine beasts or fire spirits, and he couldn't detect their auras either. However, in the depths of the Sea of Magma, there were many divine lord powerhouses mining and excavating mineral veins. Ji Tianqing thought that after the god of the underworld took control of this place, he must have sent powerhouses to eliminate the divine beasts and fire spirits in order to seize the resources in the Sea of Magma. Wonderful book house. Chapter 3561. There was nothing wrong with the god of the underworld's actions. The entire reincarnation island had become his territory. It was normal for him to plunder cultivation resources within his territory. However, there were too many people under the god of the underworld who specialized in excavating cultivation resources. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed like they were in a frenzy to accumulate large amounts of resources. This made Ji Tianqing a little wary. He secretly wondered what the god of the underworld and the Azura god emperor were up to. Could it be that after surpassing the divine king realm, the amount of resources required for daily cultivation was so shocking? Or perhaps the god of the underworld and the Azura god emperor were carrying out some secret mission and urgently needed large amounts of cultivation resources. Ji Tianqing's intuition told him that he was more inclined to the latter. Before he knew it, 15 minutes had passed. Ji Tianqing crossed hundreds of thousands of miles of lava sea and arrived at the reef island in the middle of the lava sea. He stood in the sky and looked down at the reef island, secretly observing the situation of the defenses. The reef island was too big. It had a radius of 10,000 miles. On the surface, the outer ring of the reef island was empty. There were only black and red reefs, which were rugged and protruded in different patterns. But in reality, the entire reef island was covered by an invisible defensive formation. Ji Tianqing secretly probed and knew that it was another Supreme King-level formation. And it was as complicated as the one at the entrance to the abyss of reincarnation. To enter the reef island, one had to crack or open the formation. The central region of the reef island had a radius of 100 miles, where the garrison was stationed. The terrain there was relatively flat and the ground was relatively level. There were a dozen palaces there. In the center was a spacious plaza, and the palaces surrounded the plaza. There was a formation in the square that looked like a huge altar. It was 10,000 feet tall. 8 huge stone pillars stood in 8 different directions around the altar. The stone pillars were engraved with runes of divine formations, as well as many strange diagrams. Ji Tianqing knew that the altar-like formation was the entrance to the passage between the two worlds. As long as one injected divine power, a space-time tunnel would appear above the altar. Once they stepped into the space-time tunnel, they could leave the God realm and enter the Dragon realm. It sounded simple, and Ji Tianqing was very close to the space-time tunnel. But in fact, he hadn't even figured out how to enter the reef island. Not only did they have to break the defensive formation of the reef island, but they also had to avoid attracting the attention of the island's defenders. In addition, even if he successfully entered the reef island, how to open the altar without alerting the garrison was a big problem. The closer you are to success, the calmer you have to be. You can't be anxious. This thought flashed through Ji Tianqing's mind, and he reminded himself to calm down and think of a solution. He hated himself for not being strong enough. He could only use his wits to do anything on the reincarnation island. He had to use all kinds of tricks. If he had already broken through to High Divine King, then it would be too easy. There was no need to go through so much trouble at all. As long as the god of the underworld did not appear, he would be unstoppable on the reincarnation island. However, he could only think about it. In the end he had to face reality. Soon half an hour had passed. Ji Tianqing had been invisible all this time, secretly observing the defensive divine array of the reef island. After such a long period of observation, he roughly understood the structure of the formation, as well as the strength of its defensive power. Without a doubt, this defensive formation was the work of the god of the underworld. Among the 5 peak divine kings, the god of the underworld was the best at setting up formations. Fortunately, his formation Dao attainments are still a little lacking compared to mine. If I recover to my peak state, I can definitely break this formation in 4 to 6 hours. This thought flashed through his mind. Ji Tianqing continued to observe the formation, sorting out its structure, looking for flaws and deducing a way to break it. Although this would definitely take a long time, he was already here. However, since he was already here, he could only be patient and proceed step by step. Just as he was concentrating on observing the formation, he suddenly sensed the auras of several divine kings rapidly approaching from the sky behind him. He immediately put up his guard and stopped observing the formation. For safety's sake, he did not use divine sense to investigate those few divine kings' auras. Instead, he turned around and looked over. Before long, he saw 4 streaks of divine light speeding over from the sky above the magma sea 10,000 miles away. The figures in those 4 streaks of divine light, as well as their divine power auras, Ji Tianqing was not unfamiliar with them. He recognized them at a glance. Those were precisely the 4 middle-level divine kings, who went to the surface to investigate the abnormal situation previously. As for the Heavenly War Divine General in the lead, he did not appear. He might have stayed on the surface. Ji Tianqing furrowed his brows. Looking at those 4 middle-level divine kings, he thought to himself, they came back so quickly? Calculating the time, they only stayed on the surface for 7 to 8 minutes, right? Looking at their hurried appearance, could it be that they are carrying out some mission? It was too bad that those 4 middle-level divine kings only cared about hurrying along and did not open their mouths to talk. Very soon, they flew to the sky above the reef island and rushed straight to the center of the reef island. They stopped in the sky above the plaza. One of them kneaded divine seals with both hands, continuously firing out over 100 streaks of divine power of different attributes, pouring it into the defensive divine formation under their feet. Clearly, this person was currently activating the entrance of the defensive divine formation. At this moment, Ji Tianqing stared fixedly at that divine king's casting action, looking at it especially carefully. However, in a blink of an eye, that divine king finished casting the spell. In the originally empty sky, a streak of white light suddenly appeared, rapidly spreading to both sides, forming a light gate that was over 10 feet tall. Swoosh! 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 Those 4 divine kings did not hesitate at all, passing through the light gate one after another, returning to the garrison. Before long, their figures vanished inside a certain palace. But at this time Ji Tianqing mused for a moment. The corners of his mouth curled up into a hint of a ruminating smile. Truly sending a pillow when I was dozing off. Previously I was still worried that you all came back early. I didn't expect that this major problem in front of me was resolved by you all. Without a doubt, that divine king's method of opening the space gate was clearly seen by Ji Tianqing. Previously, in the Fortune Divine Palace, the high priest had also opened the space gate in front of him once, and he had learned it word by word. At that time the high priest had been inexplicably shocked, and had called him a freak. And to Ji Tianqing this was merely a normal operation. His talent of stealing others' knowledge was so heaven-defying. He did not waste any more time, flying to the northernmost part of the reef island, hiding under a small reef hill. Those divine kings could cast their spells in the sky above the plaza to open the spatial gate, but Ji Tianqing could not do so. He could only hide in a secluded corner and secretly cast his spell to open the spatial gate to avoid being discovered. After observing his surroundings for a while and making sure there was nothing out of the ordinary, he began to cast his spell. Swoosh! Swoosh swoosh swoosh. He formed a divine seal with both hands, continuously sending out over 100 streaks of different attributes of God force into the defensive divine formation in front of him. Instantly a streak of white light appeared under the small reef hill, rapidly expanding into a space gate. Chapter 3562. It's done. Ji Tianqing stopped and looked at the space door in front of him with a satisfied smile. After confirming that there was no one around and that he hadn't alerted the guards on the island, he stepped in. Swoosh! He passed through the space door and entered the defensive divine formation. The door of light immediately disappeared. Once he entered the divine formation, he felt much more comfortable. At least, the interior of the divine formation wasn't as hot as the outside, making it hard to breathe. The temperature here was more normal, and the air was filled with divine power. He maintained his invisible state and tried his best to restrain his aura as he carefully made his way to the center of the island. While he was moving forward, he was silently calculating in his heart. According to the information I gathered in Yudu and Yuanji's memories, there aren't many guards on this island. There were only 2 Samsara Divine Generals, 20 Divine King experts, and 200 Divine Lord Realm Guards stationed here all year round. After all, the passage between the 2 worlds isn't usually opened, and no one enters or exits here. The guards stationed here are actually very free and have nothing to do. Most of the time they are cultivating in seclusion. Those upper Divine Lord Realm Guards, no matter how many there were, Ji Tianqing did not take them to heart either. Although the 2 Divine Generals of Samsara and 20 Divine Kings could pose a threat to him, he wasn't afraid. What he was really afraid of was the Blood Prison Marshal whose whereabouts were unknown. That guy was the same as Commander Mingyi, a 9th-level Divine King. To Ji Tianqing, if he faced either of them, he could only be beaten up or run away. He had no chance of winning. He tried his best, but he could only keep his life. I hope the Blood Prison Marshal isn't here and is obediently staying in Yudu City. Ji Tianqing prayed silently. 15 minutes later, he finally reached the center of the island and arrived at the guards' encampment. There were palaces made of black stone all around. Not far ahead was the plaza and the sacrificial altar of time and space. Ji Tianqing didn't rashly enter the encampment. He first circled around the periphery and observed the situation silently. In the end, the 12 palaces were quiet. There were the auras of guards and divine kings inside, but no one was moving. That plaza was also silent. There were 20 upper Divine Lord Guards guarding the north and south ends of the plaza, motionless like statues. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that although they were standing upright, their eyes were closed, and they were all silently cultivating. These guys are really hardworking. Even when they're on duty, they don't waste any time. From the looks of it, they really have too much free time. Ji Tianqing muttered in his heart. He slowly stepped into the garrison's encampment and silently approached the square. His method of concealing his aura was very brilliant. When he stepped onto the square and walked towards the altar in the middle, the guards at the north and south ends of the square did not notice him at all. He quietly came to the bottom of the altar and looked at the 8 stone pillars around the altar. He carefully observed the divine patterns and diagrams on the pillars. If an ordinary person saw this scene, they would most likely think that the 8 huge stone pillars were just for decoration. But in reality, these 8 stone pillars were the key to opening the altar. The effects and functions of the altar, as well as the method to open it, were all hidden in the divine patterns and diagrams on the stone pillars. Only by finding the correct solution among the billions of patterns and diagrams could the altar be opened and the space-time passage opened. This was undoubtedly another great test for Ji Tianqing. At the very least, it would take him 3 to 5 days. At the very least, it was very likely that it would take him 1 to 2 months. Of course, there was another possibility. Even if he spent 3 to 5 months, he might not be able to deduce the method to open the altar. After all, this altar and the 8 stone pillars were the handiwork of the god of the underworld. 1,000 years ago, when Kenshin came here from the Dragon Realm, this place was not like this. At that time, there was no altar, no plaza, no 8 stone pillars, and no surrounding palaces. This was a barren island, and in the middle of the island, there was a gate made of huge stones. There was a whirlpool of white light in the gate. That was the space-time passage. Back then, several ancient clans of the Reincarnation Island took turns guarding the stone gate. Gods and dragons who wanted to travel between the 2 realms only needed to obtain the permission of the gatekeeper and pay a high fee. But now the space-time passage was hidden and sealed with a divine array. Ji Tianqing wanted to know why the god of the underworld did this. Why did he seal the spacetime passage and cut off the two realms? Time passed silently. The reef island was hidden deep in the magma sea. The sun and moon could not be seen, and it was difficult to tell whether it was day or night. This place was always the same color. The sky was dyed dark red by the light of the fire. An entire day passed. Ji Tianqing was still focused on observing the stone pillars, staring at the dense array patterns and diagrams. Occasionally, he would walk around and observe different stone pillars from different angles. However, he still could not understand how the divine array operated, let alone find a way to open it. During this time, the 20 guards guarding the two ends of the plaza did not notice anything unusual. They were like stone statues, standing in place and cultivating with their eyes closed. In the evening, two god kings had walked around the palace in the northwest. They seemed to be discussing something, but they did not even look at the plaza, nor did they notice anything unusual. This made Ji Tianqing feel much more at ease. He had not been exposed even now, which meant that the guards stationed here were all ordinary god kings. At the very least, the blood prison marshal was definitely not here. To him, this was the best news. As the days passed, the garrison was as calm as ever. Ji Tianqing had also observed for a few days. He had memorized the formation patterns and patterns on the 8 stone pillars without missing a single detail. He finally did not have to walk back and forth to observe the stone pillars. He sat beneath the altar with his eyes closed in contemplation, and he repeatedly deduced and calculated in his mind. 5 days later, he finally made some progress and found a way to open the divine array. 8 days later, after thousands of deductions and predictions, he analyzed the way to open the divine array and found a breakthrough. Unfortunately, he could not cast a spell to try to open the divine array. If he did, he would definitely be able to quickly verify whether it was right or wrong and find the correct way to open the array. As a result, he could only repeatedly deduce and predict in his mind and choose 2 different methods. Unknowingly, half a month passed. Ji Tianqing was immersed in his deductions and calculations, forgetting the passage of time. The garrison did not change much. It was still quiet. During this time, Divine General Heaven War, who had gone to the abyss entrance to investigate, returned to the garrison alone. Clearly, he had not been able to find the reason and result, so he returned gloomily. After returning to the garrison and entering the Eastern Palace, he did not come out again. Chapter 3563. In this half a month, many things happened in Yudu. Yuanji was annihilated, and the creation divine bead was nowhere to be found. Commander Mingyi personally investigated the Fengling region master and swore to find the creation divine bead. Yuan Ba retaliated angrily and broke off relations with Commander Mingyi. He even threatened to kill Divine General Chang to avenge his son. In short, although Yuanji was dead, the theft of the divine bead didn't subside. Instead, it became more and more serious. Undercurrents surged inside and outside Yudu. The subjects under the God Emperor schemed against each other, causing Yudu to be in a foul atmosphere. However, the initiator of all this chaos, Ji Tianqing, was completely unaware of it. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Anyway, none of the strong practitioners under the god of the underworld were good people to him. Back in the battle in the outer realm, most of the divine kings followed the god of the underworld to kill him. To be honest, many of his guards and followers were killed by these people. Therefore, the more chaotic Yudu and Reincarnation Island were, the happier he was. If the strong practitioners of Yudu had internal strife and fought to destroy Yudu, he would rejoice in their misfortune even more. Today was the 20th day since Ji Tianqing snuck into the Reef Island to observe the sacrificial altar's divine formation. It was a special day worthy of celebration, because he had successfully deduced the correct opening method, although he hadn't tried and tested it yet. In his mind, he had already simulated and deduced thousands of times, modifying and perfecting it countless times. Even if the opening method he deduced was slightly different from the god of the underworld's method. But that was only a simple and cumbersome difference. They were essentially the same. After deducing the result, Ji Tianqing heaved a sigh of relief. In these 20 days, his mind had been working to the limit, using his wisdom and mind to the extreme. No matter how strong his body and soul were, He couldn't take it anymore. His mind was very tired. This wasn't a battle, but it was more tiring than a battle. Therefore, he stayed in the plaza and silently circulated his energy to recover his spirit. He had to conserve his energy and wait until he was at his peak before breaking the divine formation. This was because he knew that he would definitely alarm the guarding God Kings once he tried to break through the formation. At that time, not only would he have to crack the divine formation, he would also have to fend off the encirclement of those God Kings. That would be another extremely dangerous battle. 2 days later, Ji Tianqing had recovered more than half of his spirit and strength. At this moment, White Dragon and Ji Ke's voices suddenly rang in his mind. Master, did you go to the space-time passageway? Have you returned to the Dragon Realm? Big Brother Tianqing, is your operation going well? Are you in danger now? The two of them were the happiest about returning to the Dragon Realm, and were looking forward to it the most. This was because the White Dragon and Jiku had followed him into the Dragon Realm, and cultivated there for over 100 years. At that time he was Kenshin Ryushin, a super genius whose name shook the Dragon Realm. As his proud disciple, the White Dragon was also highly respected in the Dragon Realm, and was doing very well. However, the White Dragon had a perverse personality, and did many ridiculous things in the Dragon Realm. The evaluation of the White Dragon in the Dragon Realm could be said to be half praise and half blame. Jika's days in the Dragon Realm with him were the happiest, most relaxed, and most carefree memories of her life. Later, she followed Ryushin into the God Realm and spent her time constantly on the move, traveling and fighting. Although there were times when she was happy, it was far from being as happy as when she was in the Dragon Realm. Ever since Jiku recovered her memories of her past life, she had been looking forward to returning to the Dragon Realm and revisiting the scene of her old home. Ji Tianqing understood the White Dragon and Jika's thoughts. I'm currently at the entrance of the space-time passageway. The god of the underworld has set up a sealing formation here, and sent a large number of God Kings and guards. It took me 20 days to deduce the method to break the formation, and I'm ready to break it. Don't worry, I'll inform you as soon as I return to the Dragon Realm. Ji Tianqing replied to the White Dragon and Jiku through telepathy, and told them to relax. The White Dragon was filled with excitement and exultation as he praised his master. Jiku, however, became even more worried and hurriedly warned him through telepathy, Big Brother Tianqing, you're in a dangerous place right now. If you try to break the formation, you'll definitely be discovered by the guards and surrounded. I'll wake up Big Senior Sister, Yank, and Chao Qing you right now, and we'll work together to fend off the enemy. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and agreed. That's good too. When the time comes, I'll have to focus on breaking the formation, and won't be able to divert my attention to fend off those God Kings. Oh right, if you hadn't reminded me, I would have forgotten about that person. Jiku was clearly stunned and asked, who? Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, Bai Feng. He's been locked in the Divine Pagoda for so long. He must be bored to death. I have to go and see him. Jiku was silent for a moment and guessed his intention. He replied, yes, so much time has passed. It's time to talk to him. If he can help you, I believe your chances of success will be higher. Ji Tianqing did not delay any longer and hurriedly left the plaza and flew to the edge of the reef island. He then hid under a small reef mountain at the northern edge, and secretly took out the Jotian 10 Absolutes Pagoda. Swoosh! The Jotian 10 Absolutes Pagoda turned into a speck of black dust, and hid among the reef rocks. He then entered the third level of the Jotian 10 Absolutes Pagoda, and appeared in the cold wasteland. This space was very vast, but it was dark and cold. Ji Tianqing's divine sense spread out and quickly found Bai Feng. He was sitting cross-legged on a huge rock thousands of miles away and cultivating. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing flew across the sky and stood in front of Bai Feng, calmly sizing him up. Originally, to a high-level God King like Bai Feng, a few months was just the blink of an eye. However, Ji Tianqing realized that God King Bai Feng had obviously aged a lot. He looked tired and frustrated. It was very obvious that Bai Feng's feelings in these few months must have been very complicated. Before Ji Tianqing could say anything, Bai Feng sensed his aura and opened her eyes of her own accord. You actually still remember me and know to come and see me? Bai Feng frowned and glared at him coldly. He asked in an unfriendly tone. Tianqing, you imprisoned me here and did not ask about me for a few months. What is the meaning of this? Ji Tianqing smiled and said, you misunderstood. This is not imprisonment. I just want you to stay in an absolutely quiet environment to calm down and think about some things. Bai Feng narrowed his eyes and sneered. There is nothing to think about. I will definitely not follow you, nor will I betray His Majesty the God Emperor. Furthermore, you can't kill me. The Phoenix clan will avenge me. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said meaningfully, I have left the boundless heaven continent long ago, and am no longer within the Azura God Emperor's sphere of influence. Also, before I left the boundless heaven continent, the Phoenix clan leader and elders once talked to me about you. Bai Feng's pupils constricted and his expression changed drastically. After being stunned for a long time, he asked in a deep voice, what do you mean? Ji Tianqing smiled and said, I promised the divine Phoenix clan leader to spare your life, but you have been requisitioned. From now on you are my guard. Chapter 35-64. Bai Feng was silent for a long time. He did not doubt Ji Tianqing's words. The divine Phoenix clan leader and elders did not ask Ji Tianqing to let him go. This was also within his expectations. Although he kept saying that if Ji Tianqing killed him, the Phoenixes would definitely take revenge for him, but he was wrong. However, in reality he was not confident. He was a typical prothearch. He was loyal to the Azura God Emperor and had obtained power from him. The patriarch and elders of the Phoenixes, on the other hand, were conservative and stubborn. They were immersed in their past glory and could not extricate themselves. On the surface they submitted to the Azura God Emperor, but in reality they were not convinced. They always dreamed that one day, the various ancient clans could unite and overthrow the Azura God Emperor, and restore the ancient clan's supreme status. However, the various ancient clans were not strong enough. They did not have the courage to fight the Azura God Emperor. Kenshin's return undoubtedly gave the Phoenix clan and the various ancient clans hope. Bai Feng understood this and was not surprised by the situation. He remained silent, which meant that he had tacitly agreed to follow Ji Tianqing and be his guard. However, he did not say anything. Ji Tianqing waited for a while before saying, I'll take your silence as a yes. As long as you perform well, you may be able to obtain my trust and reward. Stay here for the time being and wait for my orders. After saying that, Ji Tianqing left the third level. Bai Feng frowned and looked at the pitch-black night sky. He revealed a self-mocking smile. I'm a region lord, a high-level god king. How can I be this guy's guard? And I have to perform well to obtain his trust and reward? Haha, who does he think he is? The Azura God Emperor? Bai Feng sneered disdainfully. After falling silent, he revealed a sorrowful expression. No matter how disdainful he was and how unwilling he was, he had to submit to reality. He was a smart person. He knew that if he resisted Ji Tianqing now, he would not have a good ending. He could only accept his fate. Ji Tianqing appeared at the foot of the small reef mountain and put away the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. As usual, he surveyed his surroundings. Seeing that there was nothing out of the ordinary, he quietly returned to the garrison. With the experience of the past half a month, he was now much more relaxed and was no longer as vigilant as before. Returning to the square, he secretly investigated the situation in the various palaces. 1 building, 2 buildings, 3 buildings. In each palace, there were 20 guards and 2 divine king realm experts. Those people were all staying in their rooms and secret chambers. Most of them were cultivating. Without a doubt, now was the best time to make a move. Ji Tianqing stared at the altar in front of him and calculated in his mind. If nothing unexpected happens, I should be able to break this divine formation in 15 minutes. If something unexpected were to happen, the time taken would be doubled. At that time, the guards in the various palaces will definitely come out in full force to besiege me. Yang, Chao Qingyu, and Bai Feng only need to hold on for about 15 minutes before I can successfully open the space-time passageway. He calculated that the chances of success were not small. There should be a 50% chance. Thus he began to act. Swoosh! He first took out the soul-suppressing bell and channeled his divine power into it. Then he gently shook it a few times. Ding, 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 a faint crisp sound could be heard. Instantly, formless ripples spread across the square. That was formless soul-suppressing divine power. It quickly spread to a radius of 50 kilometers and enveloped the garrison. Although he shook the bell very lightly and the sound of the bell was also very soft, the soul-suppressing divine power was greatly weakened. He did this so as not to alarm the divine kings in the various palaces. However, the effects of the soul-suppressing divine power were still immediate. The 20 guards guarding the north and south ends of the square had the power of a high-level divine lord. However, they were corroded by the soul-suppressing divine power and became drowsy. Their consciousness was blurry, and they could no longer be as mighty and dignified as before. They began to sway and stagger. Ji Tianqing continued to shake the soul-suppressing bell a few more times. Ring after ring of soul-suppressing divine power spread out. Those 20 guards fell to the ground and fell unconscious very quickly. He then used his divine sense to investigate the situation of the various palaces, and discovered that the guards in those palaces had also fallen unconscious. While those divine king experts were only slightly affected, their consciousness was a little groggy. Not a single person fell asleep. Just like this, Ji Tianqing easily finished off 200 Divine Lord Realm Guards. These guards fell into a deep sleep and needed at least 6 to 10 hours before they could wake up. Following this, those that could pose a threat to Ji Tianqing were only the 2 Divine Generals Samsara and the 20 Divine King experts. There were already several Divine Kings who detected the abnormality. He did not dare to delay any longer. He hurriedly put away the soul-suppressing bell and started casting spells to crack the array. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. His hands formed a divine seal as his eyes focused on the 8 stone pillars. He continuously fired out 5-colored divine light, injecting it into the tall sacrificial altar. As dozens of divine lights entered, the originally calm sacrificial altar immediately lit up with dazzling 5-colored divine light. The 8 stone pillars around the sacrificial altar were previously a dull brown color without a trace of light. Now the 8 stone pillars also lit up with formation runes one after another. This proved that Ji Tianqing's deduction was correct. The 8 stone pillars were indeed the key to cracking the divine array. According to the reaction of the 8 stone pillars, he could also verify the correctness of his cracking method. As he continuously fired out divine light, injecting it into the sacrificial altar, more and more array patterns lit up on the 8 stone pillars. At this moment, several divine kings in the 10 palaces around the plaza had already discovered the abnormality. Previously, they were cultivating and were affected by the invisible soul-suppressing divine power. They were unable to calm down. They were puzzled as they searched for the source of the soul-suppressing divine power. At this moment, their divine senses detected that the sacrificial altar and stone pillars in the plaza had lit up with divine light for no reason. A few divine kings immediately felt alarmed. They hurriedly ended their cultivation and rushed out of the secret chambers and rooms. Something's happening. Who is activating the space-time sacrificial altar? Who is on duty this month? Why is this happening? Quickly investigate the reason. Don't just stand there. Let's go to the plaza and take a look. A moment later, the 6 divine kings flew into the sky and gathered together. They were anxious and confused as they discussed. After a few words, they reached a consensus and came to the sky above the plaza. They looked down at the plaza from above. The first thing they saw was the space-time sacrificial altar and the 8 stone pillars. They all lit up with dazzling divine light and emitted powerful ripples of divine power. Next, they saw the 20 guards at the north and south ends of the plaza. They were all unconscious on the ground. In the center of the plaza, there was clearly no one under the space-time sacrificial altar. However, countless divine lights were constantly emitted and injected into the sacrificial altar. Seeing such a strange sight, the 6 god kings were filled with shock, their eyes wide open. What's going on? It's too strange. Why are those guards unconscious? Could it be that they were attacked? Everyone, look under the sacrificial altar. Is someone hiding there and casting a spell? Chapter 3565. Although Ji Tianqing was still in an invisible state and restrained his divine soul aura, But he was casting spells to break the formation, constantly shooting out beams of 5-colored divine light. This exposed his existence and position. Of course, this was within his expectations. Those god kings were not fools. Even if they were caught off guard and unprepared, they would at most be stunned for 2 to 3 breaths before they realized something was amiss. At that time, even if he was in an invisible state, he would be surrounded and attacked. As expected, the gazes of the 6 god kings all gathered below the sacrificial altar. Everyone was stunned for a moment and immediately guessed the truth. I know. There's a god king expert casting spells while invisible to open the space-time altar. Yes. It must be that bastard who attacked the guards in the square. Casting spells to open the space-time altar so brazenly and casting spells to become invisible. Isn't he just deceiving himself? This is really an eye-opener for me. There's actually someone so daring to sneak into this place to open the space-time altar? Ha 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 ha. Ever since we were ordered to guard the space-time altar, we've been bored for hundreds of years. Today we finally have some fun. Discovering that someone had sneaked in and cast spells to open the space-time altar while invisible, the god kings were not angry or panicked. Instead, they were very excited and agitated. After a few words of discussion, the 6 god kings attacked at the same time, casting all kinds of spells towards Ji Tianqing below the space-time altar. How dare you show yourself? Come out, bastard. What's the use of being invisible? Prepare to die. The god kings shouted coldly and released a sky full of sharp blades of divine light, shooting like a rain of arrows. Ji Tianqing obviously did not want to be interrupted. He exploded with all his divine power, and used a secret technique to form a divine shield. Instantly, an oval-shaped shield more than 10 feet tall formed, enveloping him and protecting him firmly. Bam! Bam bam bam! In the next moment, the divine light blades and pillars of ice and fire hit the golden shield fiercely, creating a series of loud sounds. The solid golden shield shook violently from the impact, but it was not damaged. Only a few cracks appeared. Even Ji Tianqing, who was casting a spell to break the array, was shaken to the point that his body trembled, and he frowned with a gloomy expression. I've underestimated these fellows. Looks like I'll have to put in more effort. He had no choice but to release his divine power to repair the cracks in the golden light shield and greatly strengthen its defense. The 6 god kings originally thought that with their combined attacks, that invisible god king expert would definitely be heavily injured. At the very least, he would be forced to reveal his true form. However, to everyone's surprise, the god king did not appear. Instead, there was only a barrier of divine light that blocked their attacks. Everyone was shocked, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. Still not showing yourself? You even managed to block our attacks? That guy is a little strong. That's right. That fellow's strength isn't strong enough. How could he sneak in here and even dare to activate the altar? 6 of us middle-level god kings working together were unable to force him to show himself. That means he's definitely a high-level god king. Why don't we inform the 2 divine generals and let them handle it? The 6 god kings discussed in whispers. Someone suggested reporting to the 2 divine generals. However, the other god kings immediately rejected the idea. We haven't even seen that fellow's true form, and we don't understand the situation. Are we going to report to the 2 divine generals? This is just a probing move. We haven't even used our full strength. If we report to the divine generals now, wouldn't it make us look useless? At that time, the divine generals will definitely be unhappy and will scold us for being trash. The commotion caused by us working together to cast spells is so big. Everyone will hear it. The 2 divine generals will definitely know too. Do we still need you to report it? Hearing the few god kings' rebuttal, the god king who made the suggestion immediately looked embarrassed and did not say anything else. Without hesitation, everyone worked together to cast their ultimate skills and attack Ji Tianqing. That was just a probe. They did not take their opponent seriously. But now the 6 god kings realized that their opponent was very strong. They all used their trump cards and ultimate skills and exploded with their strongest strength. Rising Dragon Slash. Moon Reflection Divine Blade. Water Mirror Divine Sword. 7 ultimate slashes of the Divine Seal. 6 paths of blood transformation divine light. Following the angry roars, the sky above the plaza lit up with dazzling divine light. It formed a sky-covering sword and saber light that slashed toward Ji Tianqing. At this moment, the entire reef island was illuminated by the divine light. A violent divine power that could destroy heaven and earth suppressed the entire plaza. Ji Tianqing did not dare to be careless. As he continued to cast spells to activate the altar, he increased the power of the golden light shield again. Boom! 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 The sky full of saber light and sword light slashed the golden light shield with ear-splitting power. A deafening explosion sounded. Instantly, the golden light shield trembled violently from the bombardment. Cracking sounds could be heard as it shattered. Dense cracks appeared on the shield, and its defensive power was greatly weakened. The sky full of saber light and sword light collided with the golden light shield. A violent shockwave erupted and thousands of fragments of divine light burst forth. Rumble! The shockwave carried the fragments of divine light and spread in all directions like a rainbow flood. It hit the palaces around the plaza. Instantly, the entire reef island started to shake. The ground of the plaza was blasted into pieces. Many gullies and holes were formed. The 10 palaces in the surroundings also shook violently and lit up with colorful defensive shields. Fortunately, those palaces were protected by divine arrays. That was how they were preserved. Otherwise, they would have been destroyed by the shockwave and turned into ruins. Although the plaza was blasted into pieces and looked like a scene of devastation, the spacetime altar and the 8 dark brown stone pillars in the middle of the plaza were intact. After all, that was a supreme-grade king-level divine array. Even a high-level godly king could not destroy it. Damn it! He blocked it again? This is really strange. How strong is that guy? He still hasn't shown himself? Looks like we can't threaten him anymore. The 6 godly kings were dumbfounded when they saw that the golden light shield had returned to its original state, and that the invisible expert had yet to show himself. Forget about the first probing attack. Just now they had attacked with all their might. In the end, they still could not hurt the other party. They could not even force the other party to show himself. This was too ironic. The 6 godly kings' expressions were somewhat ugly. Their eyes were rather gloomy. At this moment, more than a dozen godly kings flew out from the palaces around the plaza and arrived above the plaza. These godly kings were originally cultivating in the palaces. The commotion caused by the battle in the plaza was too great. They had no choice but to end their cultivation and rush over to check the situation. In the end, the plaza was devastated like a ruin. But there were only 6 godly kings in the sky. There was no trace of the enemy. The godly kings were filled with doubts. They all opened their mouths to question. Who dares to invade the spacetime altar? What are the few of you doing? Why did you cause such a huge commotion? A strong enemy invaded? Where is he? Chapter 3566. The questioning of their companions caused the 6 god kings' faces to heat up. They were so ashamed that they wanted to crawl into a hole. Fortunately, the godly kings did not question them or mock them. Everyone's attention was immediately attracted by the golden light shield below the altar. They saw with their own eyes that there was no one below the altar. But there was a golden light shield that constantly emitted 5-colored divine light and poured into the spacetime altar. The altar lit up with dazzling divine light, and dense array patterns appeared on the 8 stone pillars. Such a strange scene left the dozen or so god kings rather stunned, but they immediately guessed the reason, and they all revealed angry and mocking expressions, killing intent bursting out of their bodies. Ha ha ha. Unbelievable, someone can actually sneak in here and secretly crack the spacetime altar? I've learned something new. This king wants to see which powerhouse is so confident. This is not confidence. This is seeking death. Alright, the one who is invisible, our 20 guard commanders are all here. You should also show yourself, right? You only have this one chance, don't wait for us to attack. If we attack, you don't need to show yourself, you'll be reduced to ashes directly. The godly king stood in the air above the plaza, staring at the golden light shield below the altar. They were all full of confidence and mocking sneers. They had guarded the spacetime altar for hundreds of years, and had never encountered such a thing. Before today, they had never thought that there would be such a crazy and daring person who could do such a thing. Therefore, their current feelings were more surprised and excited than angry. However, no matter how the godly kings mocked and ridiculed, Ji Tianqing ignored them. He still remained invisible, casting spells with all his might to crack the space-time altar. Everyone mocked and ridiculed him to help him stall for time. He hoped that they would not attack and continue to mock and ridicule him. But unfortunately, this idea was unrealistic. The godly kings mocked a few times, and seeing that Ji Tianqing did not appear, they could not help but attack. Kid, we gave you a chance but you didn't cherish it. No matter who you are, what status and background you have, you're dead today. You're finished. No one in this world can save you. Die. Following a series of cold shouts, the dozen or so god kings all used their divine abilities and supreme skills as they worked together to attack Ji Tianqing. Since the square had been reduced to ruins, they had nothing to worry about. Anyway, the time and space altar and the surrounding palaces were protected by supreme grade and superior grade king-level divine formations. They were not afraid of being damaged. As for the damaged plaza, they would be able to repair it very quickly. Swoosh! Swish swish swish! In the next moment, the sky above the square was filled with the light of divine spells. All kinds of ice blades, frost swords, wind, fire and lightning poured down like a torrential flood. Ji Tianqing, who was in the middle of casting spells to break the formation, felt an immense pressure and could only stop casting spells to break the formation. Celestial Dragon Tyrant Body. He had no choice but to use his trump card, turning into a giant golden armored god that was hundreds of meters tall. His combat ability was instantly increased by 7 times. However, this was still not enough. It was completely unable to withstand the combined attacks of 14 god kings. He then opened the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and summoned Chaoqing Yu, Lander, Yang, Jiku, Yunyao, Baifeng, and the others. Swish swish swish. In the blink of an eye, the 6 of them appeared around him and were exposed to the eyes of the god kings. The god kings were all stunned for a moment. Their expressions were filled with shock and astonishment. Have they finally appeared? There are actually so many of them. There are actually 6 god kings. How did they pass through the entrance of the deep abyss and sneak in here? That's not right. The strength of these 6 god kings is not that strong. 3 low-level god kings, 2 mid-level god kings, and 1 high-level god king. Can they withstand our combined attacks? Similar thoughts appeared in the minds of all the god kings. At the same time, Ji Tianqing and his 6 companions waved their divine weapons and unleashed their ultimate skills with all their might to defend against the onslaught of divine spells. Bam! 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 Boom! Rumble! One side attacked with all their might, while the other defended with all their might. The divine spells unleashed by both sides clashed fiercely in the air above the square, creating a loud explosion that shook the universe. The earth-shattering collision and explosion reverberated in the air above the reef island and did not dissipate for a long time. An incomparably violent shockwave, carrying billions of fragments of godly light, spread out in all directions and engulfed the entire reef island. Instantly, the reef island shook violently, causing the surrounding sea of lava to create huge waves that were hundreds of meters tall. The ground around the square caved in, revealing crisscrossing ravines. The defensive divine arrays of the 10 palaces were also shattered by the impact, creating cracking sounds. 2 of the palaces were blasted into ruins on the spot, collapsing into a small mountain. The 40 guards who were still unconscious in the palaces died unluckily. After a while, the earth-shattering explosion and the dazzling divine power light dissipated by a lot. The 20 God King Realm Guard commanders were dumbfounded when they saw the situation below the space-time altar. The 6 God Kings who were slightly weak in their eyes actually blocked their combined attacks. None of the 6 God Kings died. They were all safe and sound. Even the golden light shield did not shatter. The God King who was hiding behind the shield was still casting spells, constantly injecting divine light into the space-time altar. At this moment, half of the runes and diagrams on the 8 stone pillars were lit up. This meant that the activation of the space-time altar was halfway done. If they continued to stall for time, when all the runes and diagrams on the stone pillars were lit up, the space-time altar would activate. This was not an outcome that the 20 guard commanders wanted to see. They did not need to communicate with each other through telepathy, but they had a tacit understanding. They all roared and shouted angrily, "How dare you? Die! We can't let them activate the space-time altar. Stop them! The God Emperor has decreed that anyone who activates the space-time altar without permission will be killed without mercy. Everyone, let's attack together. We can't let them succeed." Then, the 20 guard commanders attacked furiously, attacking Ji Tianqing and the others with all their might. Sky-piercing divine sword. Sky-burning sun palm. 10,000 gods greet. Supremacy of the 9 heavens. Among the 20 guard commanders, only 4 of them were 7th stage realm high-level god kings. The other 16 were intermediate god kings. However, they had the advantage in numbers. When they joined forces to display their trump cards, the power was extremely terrifying. In a split second, colorful sword shadows, divine flames and bloody light blasted towards Ji Tianqing and the others. Below the space-time altar, Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku and the others had an unprecedentedly solemn expression. The pressure on them was extremely great. Just now, they were able to block the opponent's attack because there were only 10 over God Kings. Now it was different. With 20 God Kings attacking at the same time, the power was even more terrifying. At this moment, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu and the others had the idea of protecting Ji Tianqing even if they were to be seriously injured. They decided to launch a counterattack. Chapter 3567. Ji Tianqing and his companions only added up to 7 people. Whether or not they could withstand the joint attack of 20 God Kings, no one was confident in their hearts. They might be able to block it or they might not be able to block it. Both of them would suffer heavy injuries. It was even possible that he would be killed on the spot. In order to survive and to protect Ji Tianqing, everyone unleashed their full potential without holding back, using their strongest killing moves. In the next moment, the overwhelming attacks of divine spells collided violently in the sky, creating a deafening explosion. Rumble! Bang 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 bang! Deafening noises rang out incessantly as countless divine blades were shattered into countless fragments. The destructive shockwaves spread out in all directions, engulfing the entire reef island. In an instant, the defensive divine formations of 2 more palaces were destroyed. The palaces collapsed into ruins, leaving only broken walls behind. Of course, the unconscious guards in the 2 palaces had also turned into ashes. The reef island trembled violently, and the surrounding magma ocean surged with thousands of feet-high waves. Such a terrifying force caused the weaker god kings in the sky to stagger back as their faces paled. All of them suffered internal injuries from the shock. Some of them were bleeding from their noses and mouths as they groaned in pain. Below the space-time altar, the situation of Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others was obvious. Not only were the 2 of them injured, but Chao Qingyu, Lan'er, and Yank were also severely injured. Other than Bai Feng and Ji Tianqing, all 5 of them had pained expressions on their faces. Their internal organs had all been damaged, and blood was constantly flowing out from the corners of their mouths. After suffering such heavy injuries, everyone's strength had weakened a lot. Even though they managed to fend off the encirclement of 20 God Kings, their faces were extremely stern. They were filled with worry and anxiety. Just 20 guard commanders were enough to severely injure them. If the 2 Samsara divine generals attacked, how could they stop them? At that time, someone would definitely die on the spot, right? Ji Tianqing also had the same idea, but he had no time to talk. He could only use all his strength to break the array. The sooner he opened the space-time altar, the sooner everyone could escape from danger. Swish! Swish! Ji Tianqing's spell-casting speed was even faster than before. His hands left afterimages in their wake as he continuously shot out multicolored divine light into the space-time altar. 70% of the runes and diagrams on the 8 stone pillars had been lit up. Success was not far away. At this time, the 20 guard commanders woke up from their astonishment and shock, and they all exclaimed in disbelief. A mere 6 or 7 god kings actually managed to block our combined attacks. Unbelievable. That guy who is invisible is definitely a well-known figure among high divine kings. Although they're all heavily injured, none of them are dead. It's unbelievable. Everyone, don't be discouraged. They were only able to resist once and were already heavily injured. If we attack a few more times, they will all be dead. Don't just stand there. Let's get rid of them before the two divine generals attack. Yes. If the 20 of us can't kill them, how can we face the divine general? The many god kings discussed for a while before joining forces to attack again. Dozens of earth-shattering divine powers with dazzling divine light came crashing down and enveloped Ji Tianqing and company. The attack this time was as powerful as the previous one. However, Yunyao, Jiku, and company were all heavily injured and weakened. It was very difficult for them to block the attacks of 20 god kings. Either their injuries worsened or their divine bodies were destroyed. Moreover, Ji Tianqing's spell-casting speed would definitely be affected. Everyone was well aware of this point. At the critical moment, Ji Tianqing decisively stopped casting spells to block the attacks and used all his strength to block them. While it was important for him to cast spells to break the arrays, everyone's safety was more important to him. Great protection art. He shouted angrily and used the Armillary Heaven Mystic technique to absorb the divine power of heaven and earth within a radius of 50,000 miles. In an instant, the boundless divine power of heaven and earth condensed into a crimson shield that was 1,000 feet wide and enveloped everyone within. Most of the land within 50,000 miles was a sea of lava. In this world, the most abundant divine power was fire elemental and metal elemental divine power. Therefore, this solidified shield with a hint of gold within the crimson shield was extremely powerful. Yunyao, Jiku, and company did not counterattack. Everyone channeled their divine power into the crimson shield to increase its defensive power. Boom! 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 In the next instant, the 20 god kings cast dozens of divine powers and bombarded the crimson shield one after another. Loud noises that shook the universe spread for tens of thousands of miles. A scene that all the god kings found inconceivable appeared. The crimson shield that was 1,000 feet wide was indestructible. Even though it was bombarded with earth-shattering attacks, it was still intact. It only shook violently and flashed with crimson flames. Yunyao, Jiku, and company within the shield were unharmed. However, the attacks of the god kings collapsed one after another. A terrifying shockwave spread across 30,000 miles. Crack! Crack! Boom! Boom! The reef island finally fell apart amidst the violent shaking. More than a dozen wide ravines were blasted open. The plaza was completely reduced to ruins. All the surrounding palaces were reduced to ruins. Only bricks and rubble were left. The 20 god kings were also swept away by the shockwave. They were sent flying backward and landed a few hundred miles away. Many of them were still in midair. They were already vomiting blood and screaming in pain. When they landed, they smashed into the ruined ground. They were all in a sorry state with disheveled hair and bloodstains all over their bodies. This result left the 20 godly monarchs stunned. Everyone was inexplicably shocked. Their eyes were wide open, and their expressions were filled with horror. Oh my God! What happened just now? It's that invisible God King. It's definitely him. It's too terrifying. That person's shield actually blocked our attacks and even injured us. That guy is definitely one of the best among the high-ranking God Kings. He might be even stronger than the Lord Divine General. It's over. With that flame shield around, I'm afraid we can't do anything to him. The 20 God Kings were all in a sorry state, their expressions dejected. Although they said it tactfully, everyone knew in their hearts that the invisible God King was definitely stronger than the two divine generals. After all, it was impossible for Tianzhan and the Seven Evils divine generals to block their joint attacks. Now that things had come to this, the 20 God Kings' thoughts quietly changed. Earlier, they did not want to let the two divine generals take action. Otherwise, it would appear that they were too incompetent. But now, they were all anxiously waiting for the two divine generals to take action. After all, the battle earlier had already destroyed the garrison's base and even blasted the reef island into pieces. If they continued to be entangled, the reef island would probably fall silent. Such serious consequences were not what they could bear. Chapter 3568. Why aren't the divine generals back yet? Something's not right. We can't stop that guy. If the two divine generals don't do anything, the space-time tunnel will be opened. Quickly send a message to the two divine generals and ask them to kill the enemy. Now that things have come to this, we can't care about our pride anymore. Quickly send a message for help. Oh right, are the two divine generals not at their base? When did they leave? We're doomed. They didn't leave earlier or later, but they chose to leave now. Everyone, don't just stand there. After sending the message, let's join forces to attack and put pressure on those bastards. We can't let them open the altar. Yes, even if we can't break that shield, we can at least hold that guy back. The divine kings discussed for a while before flying back to the space-time altar. Everyone spread out and stood around the space-time altar, surrounding the pure gold shield. Within the shield, Yunyao Jiku, Chao Qingyu, and the others were channeling their divine power to support the pure gold shield. Ji Tianqing took advantage of this rare opportunity to cast a spell to open the altar. Soon, the 20 divine kings surrounded them and were about to attack again. Yunyao Jiku and the others looked solemn, and their hearts were in their mouths. At this moment, in the sky above the sea of lava tens of thousands of miles away, a cold, majestic voice suddenly shouted, "How dare you behave so atrociously in front of me? You're courting death." This was a deep and heavy voice of an elder. It contained a strong murderous aura, and it was domineering and majestic. Suddenly hearing this cold shout, the 20 divine kings stopped casting their arts and turned their heads to look at the source of the shout. In the sky 30,000 miles away, there was a ball of crimson divine light that was as red as blood, and it was speeding towards them like an aurora. In just a few breaths' time, the ball of crimson light crossed 30,000 miles and arrived above the reef island. At this moment, the 20 divine kings finally saw the figure in the crimson light. In the crimson light there were 3 divine kings. The leader was a burly elder who was more than 10 feet tall with broad shoulders. This person was as sturdy as an iron tower. He wore blood-red battle armor and had a dark purple cape draped over his shoulders. His white hair draped behind his head and danced in the wind. His square face looked old and resolute. It was obvious that he had been through a lot. A pair of bell-sized eyes as deep as the starry sky. The 20 god kings were stunned when they saw the white-haired old man in blood-red armor. They all became overjoyed and excited. "Yes, Marshal. We didn't report to the Marshal. Why is he here? Oh my god. The Marshal actually came in person. Ha ha ha. With the Grand Marshal personally here, those fellows are dead for sure." The 2 immortal generals are back too. I understand. No wonder the 2 divine generals aren't on the island. They went to invite the Grand Marshal. Without a doubt, the white-haired old man in blood-red armor was the famous Blood Prison Marshal. This person was already a 9th-stage realm god king 1,000 years ago. Back then, he followed the god of the underworld and fought everywhere. He besieged Kenshin's subordinates in the starry sky, and made great contributions in battle. This person's character and aura was just like his name. Anyone who came into contact with him would feel a killing aura like a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Those who were slightly weaker would be intimidated until they trembled in fear. And the 2 divine kings following behind the Blood Prison Marshal were Tianzhan and the 7 Carnage divine generals. The 2 divine generals were both at LV8 divine king realm. If they were placed in any continent of the god realm, they would be top-notch experts who could dominate a region. But at this moment, they could only follow behind the Blood Prison Marshal respectfully. Swoosh! In a blink of an eye, the crimson light arrived above the space-time altar. The crimson light dissipated and the Blood Prison Marshal and the 2 divine generals appeared. Seeing them arrive, the 20 god kings all revealed expressions of relief as they hurriedly bowed and paid their respects. Subordinate pays respect to the Grand Marshal. Greetings to the 2 divine generals. Everyone bowed in unison and shouted in unison. The Grand Marshal only glanced at them before retracting his gaze and looking at the crimson gold shield expressionlessly. The 2 divine generals couldn't help but frown when they saw the miserable state the god kings were in. "What's wrong with you? You can't even defend the base? The 10 palaces have been razed to the ground and the 200 guards are all dead? Not only is the base destroyed, the entire island is in pieces and was almost drowned by the sea of lava. You good-for-nothings usually use up a lot of cultivation resources, but you're so useless at a critical moment. The two divine generals reprimanded the 20 god kings in a stern tone and looked furious. The 20 god kings lowered their heads and looked like they were accepting their punishment. No one dared to defend themselves. Of course, they knew in their hearts that the two divine generals were doing this for their own good. The Blood Prison Marshal came and saw the miserable state of the reef island with his own eyes. He was obviously furious. If the two divine craftsmen didn't reprimand them, they would be in trouble when the Blood Prison Marshal reprimanded them. As expected. Without waiting for the two divine generals to finish, the Blood Prison Marshal raised his hand and interrupted them. There's no need to reprimand these guard commanders. It's not that they are useless but that the opponent is too strong. The opponent in front of them isn't someone they can deal with. Hearing the Blood Prison Marshal's words, the 20 god kings let out a sigh of relief. Divine General Tianjin quickly bowed and thanked the Marshal for his forgiveness on behalf of the god kings. The 7 fiend divine generals changed the topic and stared at the crimson gold shield below the altar. He asked, Grand Marshal, the 6 fellows in the shield, other than the High God King who is barely passable, the others are all weak characters. The opponent you speak of. The Blood Prison Marshal stared at the crimson gold shield and locked onto Ji Tianqing with his aura. He sneered. The real opponent is that guy who is casting invisibility and trying to open the space-time altar. With so many of us here, he can't escape even if he has wings. He's dead for sure. But look, he still hasn't shown himself and is still casting his technique in an orderly manner. How could an ordinary person have such willpower and confidence? The two divine generals shook their heads. The Blood Prison Marshal said meaningfully, Back then, the two of you and I followed His Majesty the God Emperor and participated in the battle in the Outer Realms. All of us saw with our own eyes that person turned to dust and fell in the void. But do you believe it? That person who died 1,000 years ago actually came back to life. Tianjin and the 7 fiends raised their eyebrows, their eyes shining brightly as they revealed expressions of disbelief. Grand Marshal you're talking about. That number 1 expert of the human race? Is it really him? The Grand Marshal sneered. Whether it's him or not, we'll know once Ben Shui attacks. As his voice fell, he suddenly raised his right hand and punched at the crimson gold shield below the altar. Sky-breaking fist. As the Grand Marshal roared, a crimson fist as large as a mountain fiercely punched out. Wonderful book house. Chapter 3569. Although Marshal Bloodhell's punch didn't look flashy, it was a very simple punch. There was no dazzling light or shadow, and the fist beam wasn't exaggerated either. However, a godly monarch at his level had long reached the realm of returning to simplicity. His control of divine power had also reached a near-perfect state. When ordinary godly monarchs cast spells, divine light would fill the sky. In fact, it wasn't very powerful, and much of the divine power would be scattered. However, Marshal Bloodhell's punch had condensed divine power to the extreme. The mountain-sized fist beam was like a real blood-colored gem. Its power was extremely terrifying. It was enough to break through the spatial barrier and punch into the outer realm. At this moment, before the blood-colored fist beam arrived, the crimson gold shield was already shaking violently and cracking. Yunyao, Jiku, Chao Qingyu and the others were under great pressure. Their bodies became bent. Without a doubt, the crimson gold shield couldn't withstand this punch and would shatter on the spot. Everyone in the shield would also be killed by this punch. At the moment of life and death, Ji Tianqing could only give up on casting spells. He held the burial of heaven with both hands and counterattacked with all his might. Sword of Annihilation. He roared angrily and drew the power of the 5-element world. He slashed out the 1,000-foot-long golden sword with all his might. Boom! Crack! The 1,000-foot-long golden sword struck the blood-colored fist beam, producing a loud explosion that shook heaven and earth. Amidst the loud shattering sound, the golden sword collapsed on the spot. Thousands of golden fragments burst out, creating a terrifying shockwave. The blood-colored fist beam was intact, But its speed was several times slower and its power was reduced by more than half. Bam! In the next moment, the fist radiance, which had been weakened and dimmed, hit the crimson gold shield. With a muffled sound, the crimson gold shield and the blood-colored fist beam collapsed at the same time, turning into a torrent of divine light that covered the sky and dissipated between heaven and earth. Clearly, Ji Tianqing had to go all out to block Martial Blood Hell's casual attack. Although he had resolved Martial Blood Hell's heaven-breaking fist, the crimson gold shield had collapsed. His face was pale from the shock, and his aura was chaotic. He could no longer maintain his invisible state. Swoosh! As the light flickered, he appeared. Yunyao, Jiku, Chao Qingyu, and the others quickly surrounded him and looked at him with concern. At the same time, the Blood Prison Marshal, the 2 divine generals, and the 20 god kings all looked at him. They studied him with mixed feelings. This is the guy who blocked our joint attack? The Grand Marshal is still the strongest, breaking his shield with a casual punch and forcing him to reveal his true form. Strange, this fellow is over 300 meters tall, covered in dragon scales, and has a dragon horn on his forehead. He's a dragon? No wonder he risked his life to open the space-time altar. He definitely wants to escape back to the dragon realm. That's not right. Didn't the Grand Marshal just say that guy is the strongest human? Stop guessing blindly. Let's see what the Grand Marshal has to say. With the Blood Prison Marshal and the 2 divine generals present, the 20 divine kings were very relaxed. They had completely become spectators. In any case, they were not strong enough. Even if they joined forces to attack, it would be useless. They might as well be spectators. It's really you. The Blood Prison Marshal stared at Ji Tianqing. After a moment of careful observation, he suddenly revealed a mocking sneer. Kenshin Longtun, even if you use a secret technique to transform into a dragon, you can't change the aura of your divine soul. You still can't escape my detection. Within the golden shield, Ji Tianqing stood like a mountain and looked at the Blood Prison Marshal expressionlessly. Yunyao, Jiku, Chao Qingyu, and the others all stared at the Blood Prison Marshal with hostility. They were very anxious and worried. Only Bai Feng's expression was the most complicated. He was so anxious that he was about to curse. Motherf asterisk her. This guy is the Blood Prison Marshal of the Reincarnation Island? We're actually on the Reincarnation Island? Kenshin, this lunatic, wants to open the space-time channel to go to the Dragon Realm? Now that the Blood Prison Marshal and so many divine kings have surrounded us, we're all dead. At this moment, Bai Feng was very regretful. If he had known this would happen, he would have rather died than submit when he was on the boundless heaven continent. This way, even if Kenshin killed him, he would at least have a quick death. Today, falling into the hands of the Blood Prison Marshal was worse than death. Although Bai Feng was the ruler of the boundless heaven continent, he had also heard of the fierce names of Commander Styx and the Blood Prison Marshal. He knew that these 2 guys were the right-hand men of the god of the underworld, the famous Grim Reaper and Grim Reaper. However, he had never thought that he would meet them one day, and under such circumstances. What should I do? Bai Feng was burning with anxiety and was at a loss. At this moment, Ji Tianqing stared at the Blood Prison Marshal and asked, "You should be in Yudu City. How did you get here in time? Also, Tianzhan and the 7 demons, I clearly saw them in the palace of the encampment. In the past half a month, everything went smoothly according to Ji Tianqing's plan. He calculated the time accurately. As long as he opened the space-time altar within 45 minutes, he would be able to smoothly head to the Dragon Realm. Even if someone reported the news to the Blood Prison Marshal, he would not be able to stop it in time. And before he opened the space-time altar, he only needed to deal with 20 god kings and 2 god generals. But now, the situation was completely different from what he had expected. Hearing his question, the Blood Prison Marshal and the 2 god generals sneered mockingly. Blood Hell Marshal revealed a confident smile and said calmly, "You're right. Before this, I've been cultivating in seclusion in Yudu City. Now that the world is peaceful and there are no wars, I am rarely free. All the internal and external affairs and political affairs are handled by that old man Styx. However, the chaos you created in Yudu City made me smell a conspiracy and danger. If I am not wrong, Yuanji's theft of the creation divine pearl was done by you, right? Ji Tianqing did not deny it. He frowned and asked, "How do you know?" The blood prison marshal smiled even more confidently and explained, "Everyone in Yudu City knows that Yuan Ji is a good-for-nothing who just broke through to the God King realm. With his little strength, how could he destroy the altar and steal the creation divine pearl? Therefore, when I found out about this, I suspected that some expert had taken over Yuan Ji's body. That night, Yuan Ji escaped to the south of the city and was seen through by the city guard's governor. I sent God General Chong and a few commanders to the south of the city to kill Yuan Ji. In the end, Yuan Ji was killed on the spot, and the creation divine pearl disappeared without a trace. From that moment on, I was very sure that Yuan Ji had been taken over by an expert. Speaking of which, Old Man Styx was really muddle-headed to make Yuan Ba a scapegoat." Ji Tianqing frowned and said, "This matter is considered well-planned, but not flawless. It can fool ordinary people, but it can't fool you. But how can you be sure that I did it?" Chapter 3570. For the blood prison marshal to become the right-hand man of the god of the underworld, he was by no means an ordinary person. He could guess that Yuan Ji was possessed, and that there was another story behind the theft of the divine pearl. Ji Tianqing was not surprised. But Ji Tianqing could not figure out why the blood prison marshal concluded that it was him and not the experts of the Reincarnation Island or the Sea Race. Apart from the top experts of the Boundless Heaven continent, no one knew about his rebirth. The blood prison marshal was not in a hurry to explain. He chuckled and said, "At that time, I only wanted to investigate the theft of the divine pearl. I must find the real culprit and retrieve the creation divine pearl. But half a month ago, there was an abnormality at the entrance of the abyss of reincarnation. When I received the news, I analyzed it a little and guessed that the two things were related. It must be the same person. Moreover, I also want to see who exactly this audacious fellow is. What did he want to do by taking such a huge risk to sneak into the abyss of reincarnation? So, I have been paying attention to the movements of the abyss of reincarnation and instructed Tianzhan and the seven fiends not to alert the enemy and pretend not to know. The two of them cooperated with me to wait for you to make a move, and then give you a fatal blow. However, while we were waiting, a small episode happened." At this point, the blood prison marshal took out a communication jade slip and waved it at Ji Tianqing. He said, "You can't imagine that the Boundless Heaven Continent's Inspector Commander Qi Yan and Deputy Commander Jin Shuang have kept in touch with me. If there is nothing on a normal day, we cannot contact each other for hundreds of years. But if there is something important, we will tell each other and remind each other. After you were reborn, Jin Shuang told me what you did in the Boundless Heaven Continent. Also, Jin Shuang reminded me that after you escaped from the Boundless Heaven Continent, you fled all the way south toward the Reincarnation Island." Hearing this, Ji Tianqing came to a realization. He sneered with a gloomy face. "So that's how it is." The blood prison marshal put away the communication jade slip and continued, "Kenshin has fallen for 1,000 years, but he has been reborn and is about to recover the strength of a peak divine king. This news is really shocking. Even for me, it took me an entire day to recover my strength. This seat calculated the time. You escaped from the Boundless Heaven continent for 2 to 3 months. You should have arrived at the Reincarnation Island. Coupled with the theft of the divine orb and the abnormality of the entrance to the abyss, I naturally suspected you." After the blood hell marshal finished his explanation, a smug smile appeared on his face. Ji Tianqing nodded and said expressionlessly, "It's reasonable and everything is logical. Very good. Blood prison, you are much smarter than before. You are no longer a brute who only knows how to kill and fight. Lord Kenshin, you flatter me." Blood prison marshal's smile was still the same as before. He said modestly, "Actually, I have to thank Jin Shuang for this. If he didn't send a message to remind me, how would I know about this?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said in a cold voice, "That's right. The key problem lies with Jin Shuang. When I return to the Boundless Heaven continent in the future, I will definitely sacrifice him to my sword." "Huh." Marshal Bloodhell raised his head and laughed. He shook his head and said, "As expected of the Kenshin. You are still so confident even in the face of death. Do you think you can survive today?" Do you still have a chance to return to the boundless heaven continent? Heavenly War Divine General, 7 Fiend Divine General, and many divine kings all revealed mocking sneers and mocked him. Tisk tsk. This is the legendary Kenshin? Other than boasting, he doesn't seem to be anything special? I understand. If you want to become a famous powerhouse, you have to learn how to boast. No matter what, even if you are about to die, you can't be a coward. You have to boast to the end. Kenshin, if you were at your peak back then, you would indeed be able to escape today. But now that you are so weak, you should quickly admit defeat and surrender. Yes, with your great reputation as Kenshin, as long as you surrender, the Grand Marshal will definitely spare your life. Everyone's mocking words and contemptuous expressions caused Yun Yao, Jiku, Chao Qingyu, and the others to reveal angry expressions. Ji Tianqing was not angry. He ignored those divine kings and only stared at the Blood Hell Marshal. He sneered and said, "Whether I can survive or not, how will I know if I have a chance if I don't try? Very good, you have ambition." The Blood Hell Marshal grinned coldly and said full of confidence, "This seat's patience is exhausted. I'm going to wring your head off right now. But I wonder how many punches you can withstand from this seat?" Ji Tianqing said with a cold smile, "Who? The defeated general back then, a stray dog, your guts have grown fat now, to dare strut around in front of this seat?" Hearing this sentence, Heavenly War and the 7 Fiends were both stunned for a moment, a hint of shame and anger flashing across their eyes. But those divine kings were full of doubts, not understanding the meaning. Only the divine kings who participated in that great battle 1,000 years ago knew how powerful and domineering Kenshin was back then. 5 great peak divine kings besieged him, and he could still maintain his undefeated state, fighting for 3 days and 3 nights. During this period, the Blood Hell Marshal, Commander Styx, and War God Profound Nether were eager to make contributions, so they took the opportunity to sneak attack Kenshin. In the end, while Kenshin blocked the 5 great peak divine kings, he even counterkilled War God Profound Nether, and severely injured the Blood Hell Marshal and Commander Styx. Especially the Blood Hell Marshal, Heavenly War, and the 7 Fiends, their limbs were easily chopped off by Kenshin with a few slashes, and they fled miserably, losing all face in front of the deities. As for that unlucky War God Profound Nether, he was the blood brother of the god of the underworld. If he could live until now, his status and power would far surpass the Blood Hell Marshal and Commander Styx. Having Ji Tianqing poked at his sore spot, the Blood Hell Marshal shouted angrily, "Do you think you're still the Kenshin from back then? Since you're so arrogant, then this seat wants to see if you can still be so unyielding when you admit defeat and beg for mercy later." Finished talking, the Blood Hell Marshal did not waste any more time, brandishing both fists and punching viciously at Ji Tianqing and the rest. Sky Tyrant Divine Fist. The Blood Hell Marshal was different from ordinary divine kings. He never used weapons like sabers, spears, swords, halberds, or other divine weapons. His intrinsic weapon was a pair of supreme-grade king-grade brass knuckles, which had long fused with his hands. Therefore, every move he made had the power to destroy heaven and earth. It was true that a single punch could shatter the void, and even shatter the stars would not be a problem. As he shouted coldly, a pair of dark golden fists as large as mountains descended from the sky towards everyone. Before the fists even arrived, Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, and the rest were suppressed by an invisible divine power. It was as if all of them were stuck in a quagmire, unable to move an inch. This battle was the most difficult and dangerous battle they had ever fought in their lives. And the Blood Hell Marshal was also the strongest enemy they had ever faced. Under the Sky Tyrant Divine Fist, it was very likely that everyone would be crushed and die on the spot. At this critical moment, Ji Tianqing's expression was solemn. He swung the Burial of Heaven with all his might, slashing out a giant golden sword that could split heaven and earth. Space-Time Blade. This giant sword did not slash at the Sky Tyrant Divine Fist. Instead, it slashed at the space above the altar. Boom! Before the Sky Tyrant Divine Fist descended, the giant sword slashed through space, ruthlessly tearing open a spatial rift that was hundreds of miles long. Chapter 3571. Within the 400-mile-long spatial rift was a pitch-black void. This spatial rift was like a chasm, blocking the sky-dominating Divine Fist and Ji Tianqing's group. The two sides of the chasm seemed to be only tens of thousands of feet apart. But in reality there were countless layers of space between the two, as if they were two different worlds. Boom! The next moment, the mountain-like sky-dominating Divine Fist smashed into the pitch-black spatial rift, producing a deafening explosion. The void was shattered into pieces, chaotic and turbulent. However, the sky-dominating Divine Fist also shattered, quickly disappearing into the void. The Blood Hell Marshal's punch did not threaten Ji Tianqing's group at all, as it was completely blocked by the spatial rift. Yunyao, Jiku, and the others were shocked for nothing and secretly rejoiced. Tianzhan, the Seven Fiends, and many other godly kings were dumbfounded, and could not help but exclaim, "Damn it! He's actually so cunning? This guy is too sinister." He actually didn't fight the Grand Marshal head-on, but used a secret technique to shift the target. From the looks of it now, this guy might not be very strong, but he's full of schemes and tricks. So a battle between experts can be played like this? I've learned something new. In the future, I'll also practice spatial abilities. To many godly kings, being able to watch the battle between the Blood Hell Marshal and Kenshin with their own eyes was a feast for their eyes, and they could also learn a lot of battle experience. After all, these two were experts who stood at the peak of the divine path. Their cultivation and battle experience were unimaginably rich. When Ji Tianqing slashed out with the space-time blade, he already had a card up his sleeve and predicted the outcome. He did not need to look to know that the sky-dominating Divine Fist would definitely be neutralized by the spatial rift. Therefore, he seized every second to cast a spell to break the array, shooting out hundreds of divine lights and injecting them into the altar. Another patch of the formation patterns and patterns on the 8 stone pillars lit up. Seeing this scene, Tianzhan, the Seven Fiends, and the other godly kings all looked furious as they cursed. "Bastard! That guy is stalling for time. He's still casting a spell to activate the altar. Hurry and stop him. We can't let the Grand Marshal fight alone. Everyone, let's attack together." As they called out, Tianzhan, the Seven Evils, and the various god kings all struck out. They used various abilities and skills towards Ji Tianqing and the others. However, the overwhelming torrent of divine light, and all kinds of powerful divine skills were blocked by the void crack. Only a loud rumbling sound could be heard as the void crack was blasted into chaos. However, Ji Tianqing and the others were safe and sound. The spatial rift had become their barrier, which was more effective than any defensive ability. Not to mention these middle and high-level god kings, even a 9th-stage realm god king like the Blood Prison Marshal couldn't do anything to Su Kong. Even though he could shatter the void, he couldn't penetrate it, let alone change it. Only the will of the heavenly Tao could dominate the rules of the void. Even if Ji Tianqing had used the spacetime blade to open up that spatial rift, the will of the Great Way would have repaired it. Everyone saw with their own eyes that the 800 miles long and 10,000 feet wide spatial rift was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. After it completely healed, Ji Tianqing and the others would lose their protection. However, the Blood Prison Marshal and the various god kings couldn't wait until then. For the spatial rift to completely heal, it would take at least 100 breaths of time. By then, Ji Tianqing would probably have finished casting the spell and successfully activated the altar. Seeing that Ji Tianqing was still casting the spell, shooting out dazzling divine light continuously, injecting it into the altar. The two god generals and the various god kings were so anxious that their hearts burned with worry, but there was nothing they could do. Suddenly, a god king suggested agitatedly, "That spatial rift is between us and Kenshin. No one can do anything about it. But we can change the direction of our attack. Let's not stay in the sky. Let's all descend to the ground or burrow into the ground. Then we won't be obstructed by the spatial rift." The moment he said that, the other god kings' eyes lit up and they all tried it. "You're really a goddamn genius. That's a good idea. We can give it a try. Although it sounds a little strange, it seems feasible." As they spoke, Tianzhan, the 7 malice god generals, and the various god kings all descended to the ground. They were on the same level as Ji Tianqing and the others. Once again, they worked together to cast their ultimate skills and launched an attack. This method was indeed feasible. Countless blades of divine light, frost, and fire blasted toward Ji Tianqing and the others, but they were not blocked by the spatial rift. However, Ji Tianqing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others blocked at the same time, casting their spells to form a huge shield. Boom! 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 The various God Kings' ultimate skills all blasted the shield, creating a loud explosion. However, they were unable to harm Ji Tianqing and the others. Seeing this, the Blood Prison Marshal also changed the direction of his attack. He waved his fists and sent out tens of thousands of fist auras. Meteor shower. Tens of thousands of blood-red fist auras rained down like meteors. They all went around the spatial rift and blasted toward Ji Tianqing and the others from all directions. Every fist aura was terrifyingly powerful. When tens of thousands of fist auras blasted out at the same time, it was enough to flatten everything within 100,000 miles. Bam! 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 The shield of Ji Tianqing and the others only lasted for a few seconds before it was blasted to smithereens by the blood-red fist auras. Immediately after, he used the Sword of Armageddon and slashed out a giant golden sword that was tens of thousands of feet long. Only then did he manage to defeat the fist auras that filled the sky. Just as the Blood Prison Marshal's attack was neutralized, the two God Generals and the many God Kings joined forces to attack again. The sky was filled with God techniques. They shot out like a rain of arrows, enveloping Ji Tianqing and the others. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, Bai Feng, and the others all tried their best to defend and block. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to use the 10-directional vanishing shadows to create 4 clones. Swoosh! 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 In the blink of an eye, 4 clones of him appeared on the battlefield. Their appearances and auras were exactly the same. It was difficult to tell which one was the real one. He and the 3 clones swung their swords at the same time and slashed out sword auras that filled the sky to block the attacks of the God Kings. Boom! 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 Following a thunderous boom, the attacks of the 2 God Generals and the many God Kings were blocked again. However, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others also paid a heavy price. Other than Bai Feng, who was only slightly injured, the others were severely injured and covered in blood, especially Yank. He was too big and too obvious a target, so he was beaten the most miserably. His body was a bloody mess. Everyone's injuries were too severe, and their strength was rapidly weakening. If they continued to resist, their divine bodies might be destroyed and they might even die on the spot. Ji Tianqing decisively took out the Jotian 10 Absolutes Pagoda, and put Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others into the pagoda. Other than Bai Feng, who was placed on the 3rd level of the pagoda, the others entered the distorted spacetime to recuperate. Only Ji Tianqing and his 3 clones were left on the battlefield. They stubbornly resisted the attacks of the God Kings. The 3 clones unleashed all kinds of ultimate techniques and fought against the God Kings. Meanwhile, his main body took the opportunity to continue activating the spacetime altar. 90% of the runes and diagrams on the 8 stone pillars had been activated. Only a small portion was left. Chapter 3572. Time passed. The spatial rift in the sky had mostly healed. As for Ji Tianqing and his 3 clones, they had been entangled with the godly monarchs for a long time. They took the opportunity to activate the altar. From the looks of it, he was not far from success. When all the runes and diagrams on the 8 stone pillars lit up, the spacetime passage would appear. The 2 divine generals and the godly monarchs were filled with anxiety. Their hearts burned with worry as sweat dripped down their foreheads. Stop him! The guy who cast the spell to open the altar is his real body. The others are all clones. Don't get the wrong target. Don't focus on his clones. Heavens! Not only can his true body cast spells, even his clones can cast spells. Damn it! Ignore his clones. As long as we kill his true body, those clones will naturally dissipate. The 2 divine generals constantly shouted, as they directed the godly monarchs to surround and attack Ji Tianqing. The Blood Prison Marshal did not speak. His expression was gloomy as he constantly used divine abilities and ultimate skills to attack Ji Tianqing from different directions. Ordinary godly monarchs could not distinguish between Ji Tianqing's true body and his true body. But he was well aware and could see it clearly. Ji Tianqing's 3 clones only had half the strength of his true body. Even though the blood prison marshal attacked fiercely for dozens of times and successfully injured Ji Tianqing, 10 breaths later, he destroyed one of Ji Tianqing's clones with a punch. But Ji Tianqing was covered in blood and his hair was disheveled. No matter how wretched he looked, he was still casting spells to activate the altar. Unless the blood prison marshal could kill him, there was no way to stop him. However, Ji Tianqing was waiting under the space-time altar. In front of him was the altar and around him were the 8 stone pillars. Even though the blood prison marshal had world-destroying methods and divine abilities, he did not dare to use them easily. Once he used his ultimate killer move to kill Ji Tianqing, it would also destroy everything within 100,000 miles. Not only would the reef island completely fall, the space-time altar would also be destroyed. At that time, the space-time altar would be destroyed and the space-time passage would naturally appear. In that case, the gains would not make up for the losses, and it would cause incalculable losses. Therefore, the Blood Hell Marshal had some misgivings and was unable to use his full strength. Seeing the array runes and diagrams on the 8 stone pillars light up, Marshal Blood Hell panicked. Without any hesitation, he unleashed all of his strength and punched out 2 heaven-shattering fists towards Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's main body hurriedly dodged, but the Blood Hell Marshal had locked onto his soul aura, making it impossible for him to dodge. He was already heavily injured and in a very sorry state. If he was struck by the heaven-crushing fist again, even if he didn't die, his divine body would be destroyed. At the critical moment, he did not hesitate to enter the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda to temporarily avoid danger. Boom! 2 heaven-crushing fists the size of mountains slammed into the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. But what surprised everyone was that the divine pagoda had shrunk to the size of a speck of dust, and was hiding under the altar. When the heaven-crushing fist struck the divine tower, it also struck the altar. The entire altar shook violently and flashed with 5-colored divine light. Its foundation was clearly unstable, and a few cracks even appeared. As for the dust-like divine tower, it was completely undamaged and only flickered with a faint black light. Seeing this, Marshal Blood Hell's handsome face turned ashen as he gnashed his teeth in hatred. He had already been very cautious and had restrained the power of the heaven-crushing fist. His control of divine power was very exquisite. He could make the heaven-crushing fist's power hit the target without affecting other places. But he never expected that Ji Tianqing would not dodge or block, and actually enter a divine artifact. Moreover, the black divine tower was indestructible. Not only did it block his attack, but it had also shrunk to the size of a speck of dust. This was too despicable. A supreme-grade, king-grade divine artifact? The Blood Hell Marshal frowned as he stared at the divine tower and observed it carefully. At this moment, Ji Tianqing left the divine tower and continued to inject divine light into the altar. Tianzhan, the 7 fiends, and the many god kings also hated Ji Tianqing to the core. They all charged over without any regard for their own safety. Ji Tianqing's 2 clones had already been killed by the Blood Hell Marshal. He was alone. Not only did he have to cast spells, but he also had to block everyone's attacks. Seeing the 2 god generals and 20 god kings charging over again, he frowned as a cold killing intent flashed in his eyes. Sword of Annihilation. He used this divine ability for the 3rd time and drew on the boundless power of the world to slash out a giant sword. Bam! 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 The giant sword swept out, erupting with a power that could destroy the world. The sky full of divine technique lights were all destroyed on the spot and swept away. The giant sword's power did not weaken much as it struck Tianzhan, the 7 fiends, and the many god kings. With a great sound, the god kings all cried out miserably as they were all sent flying. 5 mid-level god kings were cut in half on the spot, their divine bodies destroyed. There were also 7 god kings who were heavily injured and covered in blood as they fell into the ruins. Even Tianzhan and the 7 fiends were forced back by his sword. They broke out in cold sweat from fright. Only then did they realize that Kenshin was still Kenshin. Even if his cultivation realm had fallen, he was still not someone they could match. The only one who was qualified to be Kenshin's opponent and could injure him was the Blood Hell Marshal. Bam! Ji Tianqing had just repelled the two god generals and the many god kings when he was struck by the Blood Hell Marshal's fist. He was sent flying. While he was still in midair, blood spurted out of his mouth and nose. More than a dozen bones on his back shattered, forming a large crater as golden divine blood gushed out. Dozens of the golden dragon scales that covered his body were also shattered. No matter how strong his defense was, he could not block the Blood Hell Marshal's fist. However, it was as if he could not feel any pain. He did not even scream as he flew back to the altar and continued casting spells. Die! The Blood Hell Marshal roared in anger as he punched at Ji Tianqing again. At this moment, the void rift in the sky had already healed and returned to its original state. The Blood Hell Marshal's fist was about to hit Ji Tianqing. His injuries were too severe, and his strength had dropped greatly. If he was hit by the fist, he would definitely be smashed to pieces. At the critical moment, he could only use the Armillary Heaven secret technique to merge with the world within a radius of 200,000 miles. Boom! Ji Tianqing's figure instantly disappeared. The mountain-like fist immediately struck the space-time altar. With an earth-shattering explosion, two huge cracks appeared on the 1,000-foot-tall altar, extending from the foundation to the top. Immediately, the altar flashed with divine light as power leaked out crazily. The 8 stone pillars around the altar also flashed with 5-colored divine light. Billions of runes and patterns flickered. An incomparably violent aura brewed between heaven and earth. An invisible power that shook heaven and earth and spacetime was breaking out of the ground. A vast and boundless aura enveloped the entire reef island, suppressing everyone. The two god generals and more than a dozen god kings all revealed expressions of horror and confusion. After being stunned for a moment, the Blood Hell Marshal's expression changed drastically as his eyes suddenly widened. It's over. The Blood Hell Marshal had a bad feeling as his heart rose to his throat. Chapter 3573. If the battlefield was not near the spacetime altar, if it was anywhere else, the Blood Hell Marshal was confident that he could have killed Kenshin. However, in the vicinity of the altar, he was afraid of breaking the vases and didn't dare to attack with all his might. He knew that Kenshin was very cunning, and would definitely use his power to destroy the altar. However, he did not dare to use his full strength. Not only was he unable to kill Kenshin, but he also could not stop Kenshin from activating the altar. Seeing that the altar was about to open, the Blood Hell Marshal became anxious and attacked with all his might. The result was as he expected. The altar that was about to open was destroyed by him and opened prematurely. He had helped Kenshin in disguise. At this moment, the Blood Hell Marshal was filled with regret. His expression was extremely ugly. Rumble. The reef island that was already in pieces collapsed under the violent shaking. Countless boulders sank into the sea of lava, creating towering waves of fire. Inside the spacetime altar, something was struggling violently, as if trying to break free from the seal and shackles. As a result, the altar shook violently and soon collapsed, scattering countless rubble. The 8 stone pillars flashed with a dazzling 5-colored light. All the runes and patterns were lit up. Of course, as the altar collapsed, the 8 stone pillars also cracked, scattering rubble. The Heavenly War Divine General, the 7 Malice Divine Generals, and the dozen or so Divine Kings looked at this scene with their mouths agape. It was as if the sky had collapsed. It's over. The altar created by His Majesty the God Emperor was destroyed just like that? Kenshin seems to have not completely opened the altar. Even if the altar is damaged, it shouldn't be like this. The altar is damaged and can no longer seal the spacetime channel. It's about to appear. That invisible power is so terrifying. I can't move at all. Is this the power of the spacetime channel? Apart from His Majesty the God Emperor, I'm afraid no one can stop or seal the spacetime channel. Once the spacetime channel appears, Kenshin will definitely escape to the Dragon Realm. Don't worry, we still have a chance. We must stop him from entering the spacetime channel. Since the altar is damaged, we don't have to worry anymore. Let's kill Kenshin together. The collapse of the spacetime altar was inevitable. At this point, the Blood Hell Marshal Tianzhan and the 7 fiends no longer had any misgivings. They all attacked Ji Tianxing with all their might. Kenshin, you damned bastard, go to hell. Even if your scheme succeeds and the space-time channel appears, don't even think about entering it alive. The 3 powerhouses roared angrily as they unleashed an earth-shattering divine art that poured down like a flood, drowning Ji Tianxing. Their strength was relatively strong. Even if they were suppressed by the formless divine might, they could still move and attack. It was just that their strength was greatly weakened. As for the dozen or so guard commanders, they had already suffered heavy injuries and were being suppressed by the invisible divine might. They did not have much combat strength left, so they naturally could not attack. They could only endure their injuries and cheer for Marshal Bloodhell and the other 2. It seemed that Ji Tianxing was about to be hit by the divine light and die on the spot. His injuries were too severe and he could not dodge or resist. At the critical moment of life and death, he hid in the Joqian 10 Absolute's tower. He used the same trick again. The divine tower turned into a speck of dust and hid in the ruins under the altar. Bam! 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 Boom! Boom! The ultimate skills of the Blood Prison Marshal and the 2 divine generals all landed on the shattered altar. Following a deafening explosion, the already fragmented altar was completely smashed into smithereens. Billions of 5-colored divine stones and gems were scattered on the ground, covering a radius of 100,000 feet. They shone with a bright divine light. The materials used to build the altar were all top-grade divine stones and gems. Their value was immeasurable. But at this moment no one was moved. Instead, their hands and feet were cold, and they were filled with despair. This was because the altar had been completely destroyed. The space-time channel that was sealed in the altar was revealed and suspended in midair. It was a white vortex of light with a radius of 1,000 feet. It was as bright and dazzling as the bright moon in the sky. The depths of the vortex were pitch black and looked very mysterious. This was the space-time channel that connected to the Dragon Realm. It quietly suspended in midair, exuding a vast and mighty spatial divine power that made everyone's heart palpitate. Even the Blood Hell Marshal, who was a 9th-level divine king, was like a firefly compared to the light of the moon when compared to the power of the space-time channel. Everyone deeply felt their insignificance and powerlessness in front of the space-time channel. At this moment, everyone's expression changed drastically. Their hearts were burning with worry, but they were helpless. It's completely over now. The space-time channel has appeared. His Majesty the God Emperor is not here. No one can seal it. That bastard sword god. He really succeeded. Once he escapes back to the Dragon Realm, he will definitely come back for revenge when he returns to his peak. We must eliminate him completely. We must not give him a chance to rise again. But he's hiding in that mysterious black tower. Even the Grand Marshal can't do anything to him. More than a dozen divine kings stared at the space-time channel with complicated expressions. They used their divine senses to search for traces of the divine tower. At this moment, a black dot flew out from the rubble on the ground and flew toward the space-time channel as fast as lightning. Everyone's pupils shrank as they exclaimed, "It's Kenshin! He's escaping! Quick, stop him! We must not let him enter the space-time channel." While everyone was exclaiming, the Blood Hell Marshal Tianzhan and the 7 Kills divine generals had already attacked with lightning speed, using their divine abilities to stop that black dot. Swoosh! 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 Destructive divine technique light shadows slammed into the Joqian 10 Absolute's tower. However, the divine tower had shrunk to the size of a sesame seed. Even if it was hit by a few divine abilities, it was still fine. The divine tower's defense was very strong. Even if it was hit and rolled dozens of times, it was still intact. It drew an arc in the air and continued to fly toward the space-time channel. In the blink of an eye, it flew into the white light vortex and entered the depths of the vortex. The Blood Hell Marshal and the 2 divine generals wanted to stop it, but it was too late. However, the divine tower only stopped for a moment in the white light vortex. Ji Tianxing's cold voice rang out from the divine tower and reverberated between heaven and earth. "Blood Hell, Thank you for destroying the altar and opening the space-time channel for me. To express my gratitude when I return, I will definitely kill all of you and grind your bones to dust. Until we meet again. While his voice was still reverberating between heaven and earth, the divine tower had already entered the darkness in the depths of the white light vortex and disappeared. More than a dozen divine kings stood there in a daze. They were filled with regret as they beat their chests and cursed angrily. The Blood Hell Marshal glared at the space-time channel. His eyes were bloodshot from anger as he gritted his teeth. His entire body emitted a terrifying killing intent. However, he did not say anything. He only clenched his teeth tightly as he suppressed his monstrous hatred and killing intent. At this moment, Ji Tianqing's words from before appeared in his mind again. How do you know if you can survive if you don't try? Chapter 3574. When Ji Tianqing said this, everyone took it as a joke. No one believed that he could withstand the attack of the Blood Hell Marshal and escape the Reef Island alive. But now he really did it. Everyone recalled how they mocked and ridiculed Ji Tianqing back then, and they all felt their faces burning with shame. The scene was silent. Everyone was speechless, and their hearts were heavy and dejected. Who knew that the Marshal was so angry that he was about to explode? At this time, no one dared to make a sound. Otherwise, they would be courting death. No matter how serious their injuries were, the dozen or so God Kings had to hold on. The Blood Hell Marshal stood there in a daze as he stared at the space-time tunnel. After a long while, he retracted his gaze. You guys stay behind to clean up the battlefield and rebuild the base. This seat will report this matter from beginning to end to His Majesty the God Emperor. The Blood Hell Marshal left these two sentences expressionlessly before turning and flying away. Tianzhan, the 7 fiends, and the dozen or so God Kings hurriedly bowed and respectfully sent the Blood Hell Marshal off. Only when the Blood Hell Marshal flew out 30,000 miles and disappeared into the depths of the lava sea did everyone heave a sigh of relief. Tianzhan and the 7 fiends did not dare to delay and hurriedly carried out the Blood Hell Marshal's orders. Those with severe injuries, immediately circulate your energy to heal. The rest, follow me and cast the spell to rebuild the Reef Island. You guys go clean up the battlefield and tidy up the corpses and belongings of your companions. Following the 2 God Generals' orders, the dozen or so God Kings immediately got busy. At the same time, in the Star Source continent of the Dragon Realm, the Tianxiang Empire in the southwest of the continent was the most prosperous empire among the surrounding empires. It was early in the morning when the sun rose, and the imperial capital Tianxiang City was already bustling with noise and excitement. The square in the center of the city was a full 5 miles wide, and there were actually hundreds of thousands of demon commoners gathered there. The royal family that ruled the Tianxiang Empire was the Tianxiang clan. But in the various continents of the Dragon Realm, the thousands of branches of the demon race could all coexist peacefully. Other than the 7 ancestors of the demon race who were publicly recognized as nobles, the dragons, phoenixes, and the 4 sacred beasts who were the top-notch bloodlines, the other demon races were of equal status. In the crowded square, demons in weird outfits could be seen everywhere. There were handsome foxes, boorish bulls, domineering tigers and lions, as well as all kinds of beasts. Most of these demons were in human form, but they still retained many of their racial characteristics. There were also a small number of demons who did not transform. They still maintained their original forms of demon beasts and spirit beasts. However, these were all relatively small in size. For example, if the mountain-sized demons lived in the city in their original form, many things would remain the same. Over 100,000 demons had completely surrounded the square. The common people were all excited, discussing something passionately. Fortunately, there were tens of thousands of red-armored guards inside and outside the square, coldly and majestically maintaining order. Otherwise, the square would have been in chaos. In the middle of the square, there was an arena that was suspended in the air. It had a radius of 3,000 meters, and was protected by several layers of dark golden shields. Countless commoners were staring at the arena, discussing who would emerge victorious, which young genius had recently made a breakthrough, or had learned some kind of divine ability. Of course, There were also many commoners who were talking about how beautiful and intelligent the little princess was. Not long after, an exquisite and luxurious flying boat arrived above the square. A young man in a golden robe from the Tianxiang tribe landed on the arena, surrounded by many guards. This young man in the golden robe was the crown prince of the Tianxiang Empire. He was tall and strong with a stocky build. On his broad and thick face, there was a 2-foot-long elephant trunk that curved naturally to his chest. His 2 walnut-sized nostrils were embedded with exquisite and noble gems that shone brightly under the sun, making him look exceptionally noble. The crown prince of Tianxiang gave a solemn and dignified speech, and the square instantly quieted down. Over 100,000 commoners listened attentively. Of course, what he said was all dignified and pompous. The main content was about the emperor's favorite princess, Tianxiang, who had already reached the marriageable age. In accordance with the princess' wishes, the imperial family had decided to hold this arena competition. Only the young genius who emerged victorious would have the right to see the princess' true appearance. If this person had a good character and a clean background, he would be able to catch the princess' eyes and have the opportunity to marry her. Other than that, the crown prince of Tianxiang also announced a series of rules for the arena competition. Over 100,000 commoners listened patiently and applauded, waiting for the arena competition to begin. When the arena competition began, the crown prince of Tianxiang returned to the exquisite flying boat with dozens of guards. It was said that the princess was in the flying boat, watching the arena competition live. Countless commoners of the demon race were excited when they heard the news. They rubbed their palms together, eager to give it a try. Everyone wanted to be the champion, to become famous in the Tianxiang Empire, and to win the princess' heart. Unfortunately, there were conditions to participate in the arena competition. Not everyone had the right to participate. Even the commoners were discussing that the most promising young geniuses were the nobles of the imperial capital. The commoners of a poor family wanted to soar into the sky and rise to the top, but the chances were close to zero. Soon the battle on the arena began. Pairs after pairs of outstanding demon race youths went up the arena, fighting with all their might. The crown prince of Tianxiang had repeatedly stated that this competition was mainly for learning from each other, and no one was allowed to kill. However, the young geniuses who went up the arena were all eager to win. Even if they were beaten black and blue, and covered in blood, they refused to admit defeat. But the more they were like this, the more entertaining it was. The commoners cheered even louder, and the atmosphere was even more lively. As time passed, one after another, the wounded monster race youths left the arena, their hearts filled with dismay as they were defeated. Most of the victorious demon race youths were unrecognizable, and they were covered in blood. Many commoners and experts shook their heads when they saw the performance of these demon race youths. Everyone knew that even if these young geniuses could survive the first round, they would not be able to make it to the end. As expected, after 2 hours, more than half of the 100 contestants were eliminated, and only 20 or so remained. The remaining demon race youths had the strength of an upper-level divine lord. They were true geniuses. Moreover, these 20 or so geniuses were most likely the nobles of the Tianxiang Empire. Not only were they talented, but their appearances and temperaments were also outstanding. No matter who won the championship, they seemed to be able to convince the crowd. The competition continued. An hour later, more than 10 young geniuses were eliminated. 2 hours later, only 4 geniuses were left. When it was close to noon, the last 2 young geniuses were in the final duel. Not only were these 2 people's strength outstanding, but their families were also very famous. They were the sons of the top nobles in the imperial capital. Seeing that the divine lion race youth had defeated the peacock race youth with a single move and won the championship, just as he was roaring excitedly, something unexpected happened. Chapter 3575. Roar! I am the number 1 genius of the imperial capital. Only I am worthy of the little princess. The divine lion race youth dressed in dark gold divine armor raised his arms and shouted with a complacent attitude. The handsome peacock race youth in gorgeous robes could only leave the stage with a dejected expression. Everyone felt that if the Divine Lion Race youth won first place, he would definitely be favored by the little princess. After all, he was a true genius of the divine way and the eldest son of the empire's marshal. His status was extremely illustrious. Such a talent would definitely be a good match for the little princess. However, just as everyone was cheering, someone realized that the Divine Lion Race youth was looking up at the sky and was suddenly stunned. He stared blankly at the sky. The excited smile on his face disappeared and was replaced with a face full of doubt and surprise. Many of the commoners in the plaza noticed something amiss. Countless people raised their heads to look at the sky, following the gaze of the Divine Lion Race youth. As a result, countless commoners saw a dazzling starlight rapidly falling from the cloudless blue sky. What's that? Look, there's a meteor. How strange, why would there be a meteor in broad daylight? That's not right. That meteor is getting bigger and bigger. It seems like it's coming for us. As expected, it's going to land on the plaza. Everyone run. Following bursts of exclamations from the crowd, the hundreds of thousands of commoners immediately exploded. Like a colony of ants being burned by fire, they frantically fled outwards. In the next moment, the meteor that was as big as a palace landed in the middle of the plaza. Coincidentally, it smashed into the arena. Boom! A deafening explosion resounded through the sky. The dark golden shield that enveloped the arena was actually shattered on the spot, causing fragments to fly everywhere. A violent shockwave, wrapped in countless fragments of divine light, spread out in all directions, engulfing the entire plaza. Immediately, nearly 100,000 demon race commoners who were unable to escape in time were all shaken by the shockwave and fell to the ground in a sorry state. After 10 breaths of time, the deafening sound and the divine light fragments that filled the sky finally dissipated. Silence returned to the plaza. The hundreds of thousands of demon race commoners who were still in shock hurriedly stood up and looked towards the stage. Oh my God! The meteor actually hit the stage. That kid is still on the stage. Didn't he get hit by the meteor? Oh my God! Am I that unlucky? Just as he was about to win the crown and marry the little princess, he was struck by a meteor. How tragic. Quick, check if that kid is dead or not. If he were to be killed by the meteor, wouldn't that young genius from the peacock race become number one? Countless Monster Clan commoners were discussing at once, their gazes focused on the messy arena, searching for the figure of the Divine Lion Race youth. He saw that a huge pit had been smashed into the arena, and pieces of bricks and stones were scattered everywhere. There were no meteors in the arena, nor were there any burning meteorites. There was only a pitch-black divine pagoda that was 30 meters tall lying quietly in the ruins, flickering with a faint black light. As for the unlucky Divine Lion Race youth, he was pressed under the divine pagoda, and half of his body was buried under the bricks. He lay motionless in the ruins. His face was covered in blood, and he was already out of breath. Fortunately, the divine pagoda had smashed into the arena's shield first. Those layers of shields had been shattered, weakening the impact by 80%. If not for those layers of shields, the Divine Lion Race youth would have been smashed into meat paste and died on the spot. This is too tragic. I thought it was a meteor, but I didn't expect it to be a divine pagoda. What's going on? A divine artifact from the heavens? If it really was a divine artifact from the heavens, then it would be his good fortune, but this is obviously not the case, right? I wonder if this was a deliberate murder or an accident. No matter what the reason is, I feel that the owner of the divine pagoda is dead for sure. The marshal's mansion will not let him off. Many of the Monster Clan commoners looked at the Divine Lion Race youth with sympathy as they whispered to each other. At this time, Crown Prince Tianxiang hurriedly brought the guards out of the divine warship and rushed to the stage to check on the situation. It was obvious that Crown Prince Tianxiang was also stunned by this sudden scene. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Crown Prince Tianxiang and the guards had just landed on the stage, and were about to push open the divine pagoda to rescue the unconscious Divine Lion Race youth. Unexpectedly, with a flash of white light, the pitch-black divine pagoda disappeared. Above the ruins, a handsome dragon race youth wearing a white robe appeared out of thin air. This person was over 10 feet tall, his body was tall and sturdy, his aura was sacred and dignified, His face was handsome and resolute, and his pair of deep eyes were like stars. However, he seemed to have suffered heavy injuries. His robes and hair were stained with blood, and his aura was somewhat chaotic. He looked around and saw the ruins, the unconscious divine lion race youth, and the stunned crown prince Tianxiang and the others. He immediately revealed an apologetic smile. Cough cough. I'm sorry, this was an accident. The dragon race youth rubbed his cheeks awkwardly and said to Crown Prince Tianxiang with a smile, I have no intention of ruining your ceremony, I'm really sorry. You guys continue. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first. With that, he waved at Crown Prince Tianxiang and turned to leave. Crown Prince Tianxiang frowned and looked at him with a gloomy face. The unconscious divine lion race youth also struggled to pull open the ruins. He raised a hand and shouted in a muffled voice, You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave. At the same time, there was a clear and melodious voice in the sky that sounded at the same time. The dragon race youth could only stop and turn his head to look at the divine lion race youth, then look at the sky. From the luxurious flying boat, a young lady from the sky elephant race flew out. She was clad in a brocade robe and was followed by 4 female guards. She flew across the sky as fast as lightning and landed on the stage, blocking in front of the dragon race youth and staring at him with burning eyes. According to the aesthetic standards of the Tianxiang clan, this girl with broad shoulders and a sturdy body was indeed a beauty that only appeared once in 100 years. However, according to the aesthetic standards of the dragon race youth, not to mention anything else, just the elephant nose on her round plate face was already very out of place. May I ask what you want to do? The dragon race youth looked at the Tianxiang clan girl indifferently and asked. The Tianxiang clan girl's face was as cold as frost. She shouted in a dignified tone, Firstly, you came down from the sky and defeated Shi Yunrui. You are the champion of this competition. You want to marry me. Secondly, you severely injured Shi Yunrui. You must try to heal him as an apology. So you can't leave now. You must be responsible to me, to Shi Yunrui. What? Marry you? The dragon race youth was dumbfounded on the spot. His expression became extremely interesting. Chapter 3576. The arena was completely silent. The words of the little princess not only caused the young man from the dragon race to be stunned, even the crown prince was dumbfounded, as though he was petrified. Shi Yunrui, who was lying in the ruins, opened his eyes wide, his face stupefied. No one would have thought that the little princess would make such a hasty decision. No, this was not hasty, this was nonsense. Before the dragon youth could refuse, the crown prince came back to his senses. He quickly waved his hand to dissuade her. Little sister, don't mess around. There are rules in the arena. Shi Yunrui is the champion. Even if you want to marry him, you should marry him. This person, he didn't even participate in the competition. How can he marry you? The crown prince spoke in a more tactful manner. But what he meant was that this dragon youth was very unfamiliar. How could she make such a decision when she didn't know his background and identity? Shi Yunrui, who was lying in the ruins and covered in blood, was also agitated. He waved his arms and shouted in a muffled voice, Your Highness, this is against the rules. Who would have thought that the little princess of celestial phenomenon would furrow her brows as she coldly stated, What rules? My words are the rules. Her tone towards Shi Yunrui was unfriendly. She was emitting a cold aura. Shi Yunrui was already on the verge of fainting. After hearing the little princess's anger, he didn't dare to speak anymore. The crown prince frowned and wanted to dissuade the little princess again. However, the little princess glared at him and said coldly, Big brother, do you want to ruin my happiness? Shi Yunrui has been pursuing me since 10 years ago. If I was willing to marry him, would this arena be held? Could it be that you think that Shi Yunrui obtaining first place is really justified? The crown prince fell silent. Of course, he knew that Shi Yunrui had been pursuing his little sister. This was something that everyone in the imperial capital knew. Even if the little princess wanted to find a husband, Shi Yunrui had said that he was determined to get first place. There were two young geniuses who were stronger than Shi Yunrui. They were both bought over by Shi Yunrui. As the crown prince of Tian Elephant Race, he knew all of this. He just didn't point it out. He didn't expect the little princess to see it so clearly. After hesitating for a moment, the crown prince couldn't help but persuade, "Little sister, even if you don't want to marry Shi Yunrui, you can't be so willful. This guy's background is unknown." Before he could finish his sentence, Tian Myriad's little princess sent a telepathic message to him. No matter where he comes from, or whether he has a powerful background, his identity as a dragon is enough. Moreover, his strength is unfathomable. He has obviously surpassed the divine monarch realm and reached the divine king realm. A divine king of the dragon clan. Is there a more noble and suitable husband than him? Crown Prince Tian Myriad was speechless. He couldn't help but glance at the young dragon. That's right, in the dragon realm the dragon, phoenix, qilin, and the four divine beasts had the highest status. They were all supreme bloodlines that were unreachable. Below the 7 top divine beast bloodlines was the bloodline of the 7 ancestors of the demon clan. At the same time, it was also the bloodline of the aristocrats of the various continents. As for the celestial phenomenon race, they couldn't even be considered a noble bloodline. Logically speaking, it was impossible for them to cozy up to the bloodlines of the dragons and phoenixes. Let alone a god-king expert, even if this young man from the dragon race was just a heavenly god, he was more than qualified to be a match for the little princess. Since that was the case, the crown prince no longer had an excuse to stop them. At this moment, the dragon youth finally understood the current situation. He looked at the little princess and frowned. "Is this a martial arts competition? Miss Tian Elephant Race, although I accidentally intruded and brought trouble to you, I didn't mean it. But I didn't do it on purpose and I won't stay here." The little princess looked at him calmly and asked, "Young master, may I know your name?" "Long Tian." The dragon youth replied without hesitation. Obviously, he was Ji Tianxing. Previously, he used the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower to leave the divine world. According to his experience, he would appear in the Dragon Realm Star Source continent and land under the Dragon God altar. But he didn't expect the Dragon Realm to remove the Dragon God altar. As a result, the power of the spacetime tunnel went out of control and sent the Divine Tower to another place. Then, the Divine Pagoda fell from the sky uncontrollably and smashed onto the altar. All of this was a coincidence. However, Ji Tianxing knew it in his heart, but he couldn't explain it to the little princess. The little princess pointed at the hundreds of thousands of people in the square and said, "Long Tian, the hundreds of thousands of people in the imperial capital saw everything with their own eyes. It's impossible for you to leave after causing such a mess. I hope you can cooperate and follow me into the imperial capital. We can discuss the future. At the very least, we can't ignore the injured, and we can't argue about the right and wrong of this matter in front of the people." Ji Tianxing looked at the hundreds of thousands of people in the square. Their eyes were focused on him and they were whispering to each other. To be honest, he didn't want to be pointed at by so many people. Not only that, the little princess and crown prince of Tian Myriad weren't evil people. This matter could still be discussed. Thus Ji Tianxing nodded. "All right, let's go somewhere else." Seeing that he agreed, the little princess and the crown prince's expression softened. The crown prince announced in front of the crowd that there was an accident in the marriage contest, and they would stop here. He asked the people to leave as soon as possible. After saying that, he brought the little princess and Ji Tianxing to the flying ship in the sky. The few guards who followed him quickly carried the unconscious Shi Yunrui and entered the flying ship. As the flying ship left the square and flew towards the imperial capital, this matter ended. As for the result, the crown prince didn't announce it in front of the crowd, so no one could guess. This matter was considered to be left unsettled. The flying ship landed in the imperial capital. The crown prince and a few guards personally sent Shi Yunrui back to the marshal's residence and explained the matter to the grand marshal. Meanwhile, the little princess of Tian Myriad Phenomenon and Ji Tianxing were temporarily staying in a magnificent palace. Of course, the architecture of the dragon realm was different from the divine world. Even the sacred and solemn palace revealed a strange and demonic aura. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing had lived in the dragon realm for more than 100 years, and was used to everything. After the little princess settled him down, she quickly left to personally explain the situation to the emperor. Other than Ji Tianqing, there was only a fox steward, a few bear guards, and a few maids from the Lu clan left in the palace. Taking advantage of the little princess' absence, Ji Tianqing found the old fox steward and asked him about the situation. After asking, he found out that he was in the southwest of the Star Source continent, in the capital of the Tianxiang Empire. Tianxiang Empire? I seem to have some impression of it. Ji Tianqing stayed in the room alone and fell into deep thought. This empire seems to be in the Green Lotus region. It seems to be one of the stronger empires. Chapter 3577. Even though Kenshin had lived in the Dragon Realm for more than 100 years back then, but the Dragon Realm was just too big, not the least bit inferior to the God Realm. The layout of the world here was almost the same as the God Realm. Most of the area was ocean, and there were 5 continents and countless islands scattered around. On each continent there were dozens of large and small regions, and each region had many empires. Seriously speaking, this world should be called the Demon Realm. After all, 99% of the living beings here were demons and all kinds of demon beasts. When demons from the lower realm became gods, they would also ascend here. When Ji Tianqing ascended, he used the 5 elements world to bring Black Dragon and Qianyu, allowing them to ascend to the God Realm. Otherwise, they would definitely ascend to the Dragon Realm. However, the dragon race was the most powerful race in this world, and also the overlord of the 5 continents. Therefore, this world was called the Dragon Realm. Back then, Kenshin lived here for more than 100 years, and half of his time was spent in closed-door cultivation. The other half of his time, he traveled all over the 5 continents, traveled the 4 seas, and adventured everywhere. However, each continent had dozens of regions and thousands of empires. At most, he could only remember some regions but not which empires there were. Forget it, since I've come to the Tianxiang Empire, I'll rest here for a while. Anyway, everyone is seriously injured and needs to recuperate in closed-door cultivation for a long time. If the Tianxiang Emperor is easy to talk to, this matter is nothing. If he's not easy to talk to, these monarchs can't stop me. After figuring out the current position and situation, Ji Tianqing was at ease and was not anxious. The Star Source continent was located in the center of the Dragon Realm, and the other 4 continents were in the east, south, west, and north respectively. He returned to the Dragon Realm, firstly to find his son, Wuhan, and secondly to visit the old dragon. That old dragon was resting in the Tianlong continent, and it was very far away from here. It would not be able to rush back in a short time, so there was no hurry. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing entered the secret chamber, took out the Jiutian Tenju pagoda, and entered the distorted space to heal. Several bear guards stood guard outside the secret room. On the surface they seemed to be protecting him, but in reality they were monitoring him. To put it bluntly, Ji Tianqing was currently under house arrest in this palace, awaiting the punishment of the little princess and the emperor of Tianxiang. As for how to resolve this matter, the little princess was currently discussing it with the emperor of Tianxiang. In the depths of the palace, Emperor Tianxiang's study room. The Emperor of Celestial Phenomenon sat on a spacious divine stone throne with a frown on his face, as he stared at the little princess of Celestial Phenomenon. Even though he doted on his smart and far-sighted little daughter the most, which was why she was so confident and assertive. But today, after he heard the whole story, he frowned deeply. Xiangyu, although you didn't make a big mistake in this matter, you were too reckless. If that person only had the bloodline of one of the 7 great noble families, this matter would still be manageable. However, that young man was a member of the Dragon Clan. Furthermore, according to what you said, he seems to be a divine king powerhouse. A dragon with such strength and status must have a great background. Our Tianxiang Empire can't afford to offend them. In the entire Tianxiang Empire, there was only one divine king powerhouse. That was the old ancestor of the royal family. Although this old ancestor often went into closed-door seclusion and didn't show his face for hundreds and thousands of years. Furthermore, he was only a first-degree realm lower divine king. However, it was his existence that allowed Tianxiang Empire to surpass the other empires and become the most powerful among the 8 nearby empires. It was precisely because the emperor of Tianxiang knew the power of a divine king that his expression was so solemn. Little Princess Xiangyu frowned and retorted, "Imperial father, based on the situation at that time, I could only do this. You know that I don't like Shi Yunrui. Even if he pursued me for 10 years, it was useless. If I don't like him, I don't like him. However, he bribed 2 opponents and won the first place in front of everyone. I can't go back on my words." At this time, Long Tian accidentally landed on the stage and injured Shi Yunrui, which also ruined the marriage by martial arts competition. I could only beat him at his own game and let the marriage by martial arts competition end without a conclusion and keep Long Tian here. Imperial father, I saw that he was seriously injured and his character isn't cold and arrogant. He should be easy to get along with. Plus, he must have met with some accident, which was why he fell from the sky. I arranged for him to stay in the palace. As long as we put in more effort and methods, we might be able to keep him here. If he is really willing to marry me as his wife, then it will be my and Tianxiang's royal family's honor. Xiangyu was different from other unruly princesses. Although her character was stubborn and dictatorial, she was shrewd and good at scheming. Compared to the crown prince, she was calmer and smarter. Emperor of Tianxiang frowned and thought for a while before nodding slightly. "Xiangyu, I understand your thoughts. You think that you are extraordinary and look down on ordinary demon clan geniuses. Not to mention the dragon and phoenix bloodline. At least the 7 aristocratic bloodline geniuses will be able to enter your eyes. You accidentally met this Long Tian, so it's understandable for you to want to seize the opportunity. But you must remember that you must be patient with this dragon clan youth. You must not provoke him. Of course, if you have the chance, it's best to investigate his cultivation realm and his identity and background. Only when you understand him well enough, then we can decide whether to keep him or not." Xiangyu nodded and said, "Father, don't worry. I know what to do. Although he is under house arrest in the Cloud Palace, I have instructed the servants and guards to treat him with the utmost respect, and not to offend him in any way. But as for the marshal's residence, I still need you to appease them. That disappointing fellow, Shi Yunrui, will definitely feel wronged and complain to the marshal." Emperor of Tianxiang nodded again and waved his hand. "All right, I will persuade the marshal. As for that Long Tian, I will leave it to you to receive and deal with him. I will not step in. If you two don't get along well, I will step in." His meaning was clear. If there was a conflict between Xiangyu and Long Tian, at least he could step in and resolve it. "Thank you, father, for your help." Xiangyu bowed and left in satisfaction. After walking out of the study, she looked up at the scorching sun in the sky and secretly clenched her fists. She muttered, "Appearance, temperament, bloodline, and strength are all excellent choices. How can I miss out on this? Only such an extraordinary young man from the dragon race is worthy of me, Xiangyu." Although she had lived for more than 1,000 years, she only had the strength of a high-level divine lord. In the entire Tianxiang Empire, she could only be considered a first-rate genius and not the top. But she had been the apple of Tianxiang Emperor's eye since she was young. She was doted on by the entire royal family, and even her brothers gave in to her. This raised her to be arrogant and had a very high standard. All along, she had looked down on the most outstanding young geniuses in Tianxiang Empire. She always felt that only the descendants of the 7 aristocratic bloodlines could match her status. And now, a dragon clan youth had fallen from the sky. This was a gift from the heavens to her. How could she not cherish it? Chapter 3578. Only 2 days had passed in the dragon realm. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, had been recuperating in the distorted spacetime for 3 months. His injuries had recovered by 80%, and his mental state had also returned to its peak. Originally, he wanted to recuperate in seclusion for another 2 months to completely heal his injuries. But unfortunately, someone kept knocking on the door of the secret chamber. After he sensed it, he could only end his recuperation and walk out of the secret chamber. When the 2 Bear Clan guards outside the door saw him appear, they hurriedly bowed in greeting. "Young Master Long, Her Highness is waiting for you in the living room. She has something to discuss with you." Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and walked towards the living room. He thought to himself, there has to be an explanation for this matter. Since she came to find me, then let's have a talk. After a while he entered the bright and spacious living room. Xiang Yu was sitting on the main seat, looking dignified. Her clothes and hair accessories were also very exquisite. It was obvious that she had dressed up meticulously. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing frowned slightly, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. But he did not show any abnormalities. He cupped his hands towards Xiang Yu and sat down. "You're looking for me because of the previous matter?" Although his attitude was relaxed and indifferent, he was not polite and did not address her as Her Highness. But Xiang Yu did not mind and felt that it was natural. There was no choice. Who asked him to be the noblest dragon? "Young Master Long Tian, Shi Yunrui has already been sent back to the marshal's residence. His injuries were treated in time and should not be a problem. Also, I have personally explained to the marshal and pleaded with him. The marshal's residence will not blame you." Ji Tianqing nodded and thanked her. Xiang Yu's gaze became much gentler. Her originally reserved attitude became more fervent. Obviously, she saw the hope of improving their relationship. Thus, she took the opportunity to ask Ji Tianqing, "Young Master Long, I saw that your complexion was not good and your body was stained with blood. You seem to have suffered serious injuries. Can you tell Ben Gong what happened to you? Also, I have not asked where you are from." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and chuckled. "I did encounter an accident and suffered serious injuries, but I can't tell you the details. Furthermore, there's no need for you to inquire about my background and origins." "Young Master Long, what do you mean?" Xiang Yu was startled. She frowned and looked a little disappointed. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "Then I'll be frank. You and I are strangers. If it weren't for this accident, you and I wouldn't have met, let alone know each other. Since there is no problem with Shi Yunrui, I will leave today. Of course, you helped me dissuade the Grand Marshal, so I owe you a favor. I can compensate you." At this point, he pondered for a moment before continuing. "You're the little princess of the Tianxiang Empire, and it seems like you're quite favored. You definitely don't lack cultivation resources. How about this? I'll give you a king-grade god artifact as a thank you gift and we'll be even. How about it?" Anyway, he had dozens of king-level lower divine artifacts stored in his spatial ring. Since he had no use for them, he didn't mind giving one away. However, to the Tianxiang Empire, a king-grade lower divine artifact could be said to be in existence that protected the empire. Returning a favor like this was considered a big deal. Xiang Yu was obviously startled. For a moment she was tempted. However, she immediately restrained the urge to nod. She hurriedly shook her head and said, "No. Young Master Long, although a king-grade god artifact is precious, this is not what I want." "Then what do you want?" Ji Tianqing asked subconsciously. However, he regretted it after asking. Xiang Yu suppressed her embarrassment and mustered the courage to look him in the eye. She said in a serious tone, You want me?" Although Ji Tianqing had already expected this result, he was still speechless. Xiang Yu said with a red face, "You defeated Shi Yunrui. You're number 1, so you have to marry me." Ji Tianqing smiled bitterly and shook his head. "I said that it was an accident. Your request is unreasonable. You only have 2 choices now. Accept or reject my gift. You only have 10 breaths of time to consider. When the time is up, I will leave." Xiang Yu was instantly filled with anxiety. Her eyes reddened as she asked, "But you ruined my joust for a spouse. Shouldn't you make it up to me? Even if you don't want to marry me for the time being, you should stay a little longer. Maybe after we get to know each other, you'll—" Without waiting for her to finish, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, "Your Highness, you and I both know that you don't want to marry Shi Yunrui. Coincidentally, I fell from the sky, so you used me as an excuse. However, I already have a wife and children, and I'm not interested in the celestial phenomenon race. Sorry. With that, he took out a crimson battle axe from his spatial ring and placed it on the table in front of Xiangyu. This is a thank you gift. Goodbye. After putting down the axe, he got up and was about to leave. Although he was indeed in the wrong first, injuring Shi Yunrui and ruining Xiangyu's martial arts competition. However, he had given a king-grade low-grade god artifact as a thank you gift. That was already the best he could do. Most importantly, he didn't want to continue being entangled. This matter was Xiangyu's wishful thinking. There was nothing to talk about. Stop right there. Seeing Ji Tianqing walk to the door of the living room, Xiangyu hurriedly chased after him. Young Master Long, are you looking down on the celestial phenomenon race? Do you think that we have a low-grade bloodline and are not worthy of your dragon race bloodline? Xiangyu opened her arms and stood in front of Ji Tianqing, looking at him with tears in her eyes. At first she felt wronged and her tone was quite sad. However, Ji Tianqing looked at her little elephant nose swaying in front of his eyes and couldn't help but want to laugh. Cough cough. Don't misunderstand. I don't have such thoughts. Then why don't you want to stay a day longer? Do you hate me so much? Xiangyu stubbornly raised her head with a pleading look in her eyes. Sigh. Ji Tianqing sighed and shook his head. He had already seen through Xiangyu's thoughts. He wanted to give her a king-grade god artifact, and this matter would end here. Since she insisted on being entangled, he could only be merciless. Little princess, have a good rest. We won't meet again. He smiled at Xiangyu as he said this. Before Xiangyu could react, he released an invisible spiritual energy and hit Xiangyu's mind. Instantly, Xiangyu felt a buzzing sound in her mind, and then she lost consciousness. She closed her eyes and slowly fell to the ground. She fell into a deep sleep. Ji Tianqing didn't stay any longer. He strode out of the living room and left quickly. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, he used the art of invisibility and quietly left the Cloud Palace. Even when he passed by the patrolling imperial guards and passed by the many hidden sentries in the palace, he wasn't discovered by anyone. With his strength as a divine king, he could come and go as he pleased within the borders of the celestial phenomenon empire. A quarter of an hour later, he left the imperial city and flew into the sky as fast as lightning, quickly disappearing into the distance. Book Guest House Reading Website. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.